And welcome to Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 81. This one is a continuation of the last, say, 5-6 meetings or so. We've been discussing ontology and mythology, the connection between those, in terms of being sort of codependent and stacking on each other as being more significant to us in our experience and in normal perception.
From the perspective of the complex adaptive system, what we're talking about two very specific layers, delineated by fundamental and significant. That can come up in a few ways. This layering concept is fundamental to our discussion in general. Animism has the ontological landscape in that sense. Our big chart, the big diagram, also has the subjective peak.
And when you
going
say
on.
like animism, it's sort of people want to think everything's alive or whatever, but in a sense, the way that we visualize ourselves and our bodies, we're all parts. There's just different layers. It depends what layer you're at. Like we're all in the soup of molecules, if you will.
Like if you picture a topological map, for example, we're talking about like layering up and down, right, and having those peaks, and the alive bits in that picture. It's like if you picture them as antennas throwing information at each other, which track down through the fundamental layers and come
resonating
back up.
down through common media. That's how communication and connection happens causally.
Like if you picture the car diagram, that's what I'm referring to. So you have these peaks, and then you have like these messages going from peak to peak. Or last time I drew a picture of these peaks from the side view, with them shooting messages and to which layer that they are interacting with on other peaks, and sometimes with itself.
Yep. So we are having a, as usual, casual development meeting.
Is there a point in mentioning this at this
enjoying
point?
ourselves? I like to sometimes at the start, just because to give for anybody who's
this is their first
maybe the first
rendezvous
time. Yeah. Just a note: we're here for our enjoyment, primarily.
As much as we are for the conversation. It's a kind of conversation we don't get to really get into a lot of details with other people either.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
Yep. So we were talking about language. We're developing language to talk about the world around us, and especially what that means especially is the world within us, within our own cognition. How these senses are bubbling up through layers. Like the materialistic view could agree and imagine very easily that molecules bumping together eventually are creating a thought, right? Something like that. So we're not far off of that, except we of course introduce the downward causality, which we call download, in which systems in higher and higher layers may do things that the bottom you can't explain from the bottom up.
Right. So
there's two ways of causality happening here, which throws people for a loop, typically.
Right. The missing ingredient, in our case, the missing term that bridges these kinds of things together would be isomorphism, as expressed by the whole Gödel-Escher-Bach exposition and I Am a Strange Loop exposition by Douglas Hofstadter. This is where we're getting that idea of top-down causality. And its connection with Gödel's incompleteness theorem is a little murky. However, getting brushed up on that particular work will slot in a few missing pieces for the vast majority of where we're coming from, at least in the way we explain it.
Right, like I'm just kind of imagining the thought popping up in your head of I am, I exist. And even to say it, to put it out into the waves, into the sound waves, to cause So that's like something coming back down everywhere, causing an effect.
Well, that's like going all the way back to the religious mindset, to the traditional origin of the entire, um, the philosophical question of existence. I am, therefore I think, therefore I am. All of
Right.
these kinds of interesting little statements that only become true by virtue of being stated within their particular um, mythology within which
Mhm.
they originated.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So it only makes sense within a certain language layer.
So I am is kind of like a soundbite that materializes it within a mythology, and by its materialization, it drives the rest of the mythology to interact with that statement. That's kind of like the gist of it, and it's kind of so. Where the incompleteness theorem comes into it is that the statement really appears to be legitimate within the framework within which it appeared, but it cannot be arrived in by that framework, right? Like that's the disconnect that we're having in terms of you can't jump that layer up,
It can't be arrived at from layers below.
like from the theorems and the
Right.
axioms given to the system below it. Yeah. However, it's still like being a legitimate statement of that system, caused by self-reference, and self-reference leads to I-ness, if you will. Or in Buddhist speak, it's like I-making. You make the I in to adjust for whatever mythology you're running at the time.
Hmm. Right, and mythology itself, I think, is
And
something
we call
we
it
want.
self. We call it self in our model. Like that's that moniker self. If you remember, that exists only in narratives. There's a
Yeah.
self-reference, but a self
Yeah.
in the narrative is this is the exact same element
Hmm.
that I'm referring to here.
Right. One of the major kind of goals or targets that I wanted to get to is the fact of mythology, in the way we use it, being quite different from what most people think of when they hear the term.
Yeah, we say that
myth,
every time.
Myth or mythology.
So usually,
The way people take it is a story that's untrue.
that's what I was gonna say.
The
Yeah.
way that we want to present it is what the running truth inside of you. That's your myth. sort of.
I usually phrase it as it's the story you are believing at that moment. That's the mythology
Yeah.
that it's the thing
Right.
that gives meaning to all the different pieces. Like when you combine the different pieces and it says something, that something comes from the mythology. It's a soundbite of that mythology.
Right. So again, this is a common theme, but we're appropriating a term and taking it from a useless form.
And what do you mean by useless?
Just the way that people use it, that it's just old-timey stories that aren't to be believed. That's what myth is, right? Oh, like, do you want to...
Right, it doesn't add anything to the conversation. It's like you
Like-
may as well just say stories. You may as well just say imagined things.
Yeah.
Why call it even
Right,
myth
it's
at that point?
it's completely useless as it's used, which it isn't surprising at all, because of the, I guess, obfuscation, the self-obfuscation.
Well, it's funny because the reason that we feel or think of myth that way is due to the mythology that we are running, capital M, that states that myths or stories are untrue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you have that mythology ingrained in you,
Right.
you will naturally
And-
associate that word with untrue stories.
So we would have to, like, we must, when we appropriate a term, we must ask, is there another word or term for what we mean when we use capital M, myth or mythology? Is there a word in common parlance or usage?
Narratives.
That's a story.
But,
There's
but
no
narrative does not have that negative connotation.
no, but you can't use the word narrative
Well,
in common parlance in public and have people think, oh, that's my reality.
No. People just do that all the time. Actually, I'm not sure about your personal experiences, but this word is used in that context a lot.
A narrative,
So,
a narrative.
yeah,
Like you
and I'm
look on the
talking like
dictionary.
I'm
it's,
talking business context even. It's like if you're trying to set something up, what's the narrative behind that? Like it is something that comes up more technically.
but it's aside from the introspection. It's still just a story out there.
Not just a story. It's like saying the theory of gravity is just a theory, right? Like for in the people in the know, that's just not what. It's just a model, right? So in this case, the word narrative, especially in the professional world at least, is not used in the same way that mythology is used in common parlance. So very often you would get
Maybe in
better
like
mileage.
I'm imagining it when you say professional, but I'm imagining like tech in which tech
No,
has
office.
to.
I think chief executive officer type stuff. Office.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody refer to like narratives as
Marketing does, for sure. What's your experience with marketing? I'm assuming it's negligible.
a spoken or written account of connected events.
Yeah,
a
it's not-
story.
It doesn't have that.
An account of connected events.
Right.
It's an account. That's a separate thing.
It's closer to the way we're using it for model speak.
Maybe
Moment
closer,
by moment
but
by moment by moment, which are events.
um,
The f-
I yeah, I don't know. Like, you may be right, like towards right, but
Account is another way. Account will have an account of events would be would be like a narrative that you would take on to be more technical,
what I'm trying to say is
right?
there never is an introspective connection
Okay.
with actual with an underlying process which is giving you a concrete reality that you do not question.
The events.
That doesn't get pointed at.
Right. The events
Narrative
themselves.
is a story about things out there, whatever.
So the narrative becomes the encompassing owner of all the events. That's what I'm saying by also saying that mythology is the thing that gives meaning to each individual moment in the narrative.
Sure, but now you've just separated the two.
Narrative is the technical formation of moment by moment by moment by moment. That's a string. The string itself becomes a soundbite. The soundbite becomes the myth. Like it's layered
Yeah,
up. It's layering
but
up.
that connection is never made by people who use the term
Oh, I'm
narrative.
not arguing.
That's what
That-
I'm saying. That's
it's not
we
only
have
not-
to look for.
So-
Is there another word that uses what we're trying to point to? There is no. Nobody talks about what we're pointing to.
Sure.
A concrete,
but
like a base reality that exists unquestioningly
That
in
doesn't-
your subconscious, sort of.
even in our parlance, that doesn't appear in this context, because if you want to do that, you'll have to step back further down and go into self-reference and formulating how self-reference becomes self in narrative, right? So narrative is just this anything. And because it's anything, you can make that connection or you can skip that connection, and the easier thing for the system is to skip the connection. Why bother? Just keep going with the narrative. But
Mhm.
but if you want to point to the connection between formulating the narrative, connecting back to affect, you'll have to dig deeper into like memetics and all of that stuff. So we're kind of not on that. We're here. That stuff is like here in the operating system, and we should probably be more chunked in that case. Reference to it is
Chunking is
fine.
good.
Reference to it is fine if we use it on an assumption basis. Let's put that into, assume that part in the lower layer: self-reference, narrative, conceit, self. Self is that, therefore that they're inserted into narrative. Yep.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to make a big argument about it.
It's not an argument.
I just wanted to say that we appropriated the term myth.
Yes.
The way most people think about the term myth is not what we're trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, there is no current word that exists instead of myth that we could use that most people would understand of what we're pointing at.
What about account?
Those are like, no.
No. But you didn't say
Account
why.
isn't your reality.
I'm not sure I follow that though. Maybe this is the argument.
You can't talk to people about what we're calling myth. There is no language available for
Yes,
it.
but you can recount events, right?
You're not pointing at it.
No,
Nobody
no.
will understand.
The account is still a soundbite. It's still a narrative. It still fits into mythology. They're just using that word to mean a more real.
I think you're missing my point. I'm
Probably.
just trying to point at the fact that we appropriated the term. We did it for a reason which is unavoidable.
Right.
That
okay.
unavoidable reason is because there's no other word. That's all.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. Like,
Okay.
I was going out on a different tangent entirely
Right.
then. But yeah, you're in that sense you're right, and not to toot my own horn yet again, but that's basically how I settled on that word too.
Yeah, I just wanted to convey.
Okay, you're
convey
accounting that.
Mm-hmm. And because I wanted to get at this.
See, recount.
I wanted to get at this because
We should appropriate accounting.
I think we did.
Like recount, account, like it really works in this case because in this case you're accounting the myth, you're recounting the myth. That's why it works.
Mm-hmm.
It's as a term, like it works as a language term. You can speak it. But an account is like a narrative that is more objective, if you will.
Okay. Just
Or
trying to
objective enough for the story.
I don't know the context
for it
of
to
the
be causal.
usage of why it would be why we need that term.
Account is when you take a given narrative and recount the constituent events in it. You account for them.
So that's not. We don't have to appropriate that. That's just.
No,
A
it's just
story
an-
happened. I recounted it.
It's just an easier way to look at specifics. Anyway, to me that makes a lot of sense. To point
It's already in the language.
to point it into
we
that.
can use it without appropriating.
Or we can appropriate the shit out of everything we want.
No, it has to be
Anyway.
very careful. There has to be a reason for it. We have to be backed into a corner linguistically, and then that's
Well,
the only way that
Okay.
makes
Well,
sense.
I'm a
to do it.
proponent for that term being more technical in nature and basically being the reverse of building the narrative. It's kind of like taking a given narrative and finding out the moments that have made it up. So working backwards from the full to the pieces. Where in general we're building from pieces to full. In this case, we're going top down.
Okay, I think that could be useful.
That's
in
what
some,
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
in some ways. Some days, some sunny days.
It's just a way to think about narrative going top down instead of bottom up.
So yeah, like
Like
it's
say,
just like a tiny comment. Like we appropriated myth.
Yeah.
Myth I want to drive towards because people don't understand, and I think it's very powerful if they did. Most don't understand that.
I think I'm just accepting it as a matter of fact.
Like-
That's why I'm not really persuaded by anything because I am there.
I'm looking for leverage points, leverage points and powerful leverage points, which, like politics, religion, all these mass movements are because of myth.
Yeah. So
That's the underpinning. So
If we
that's
work-
where the power
if we s-
is in that.
if we start at the top with myth, we can divide it into what's sound bites, which are basically narratives.
But why are we starting at the top? What's the goal right now? What's the
Yeah,
objective?
To,
Where
to
are we
paint a
going?
picture. To paint a picture. I'm always trying to paint a picture. In this picture, we're just saying that myth is a narrative of narratives of narratives. So, little narratives at the bottom, the shared layer, hyper narratives, combinations of individual narratives into a network of narratives that interface with each other, and the full overarching, the full thing that is happening all at once at the same time,
Which is typically represented by lifting up a subset of those interconnected narratives.
the way I usually
As the
picture it.
the big
You've seen it
story.
you've seen it in the diagram. The way I usually picture it is like if you have your narratives looking like a crossword puzzle in 2D, it'd be like crunching them all down into a singularity. And if they are not isomorphic with each other, you get what's called obfuscation. And you get by obfuscation by pleading to the quantifiable.
But you're not necessarily crunching every last meta-narrative.
Well, no, I'm not.
There's a specific subset which is like, this is our myth, which you would say, like, you could read a Bible or something, or read a political book, which gives you the underpinnings for a certain revolutionary mindset. That underpinning, that revolutionary mindset, that's what floats up, I feel like, to the top as a
It's more the layer.
as a hyper
the
meta narrative,
the
hyper narrative and narrative, right?
The meta narrative is like everything at once at the same time. Now, just like with say the brain or the universe, it's like you've heard this. Like your brain is able to make more connections across its spectrum than there are stars in the galaxy or some shit like that.
Sure.
Well, cool, except not one single human being is using every single one of those potential connections. You have this human being having a subset of that, this human being having a subset of that. So there's like lots of potential. That's like the myth. But the actuality is the thing that happens. It's like a tiny subset of what can happen. Only this thing happened over here. Only that thing happened over there.
So in the way you describe it there as a potentiality is quite a bit different than the presentation, in other words, how you would share that myth.
Right. And that has to do with the presentation being at least 2 layers below. Because you're not presenting it as a hyper narrative, you're presenting it as a concrete narrative. And that concrete narrative will have to have a beginning and middle and an end, which will omit a lot of details. So from a holographic principle standpoint, it's like taking the full encompassing sphere that has the 2-dimensional description of the 3-dimensional image inside of it, cutting it in half and having one blurry piece, cutting it in half again and having 4 blurry pieces. On and on and on it goes, and all you get is one blurry piece, right? Like, so we're not talking about being able to actually connect with the meta-narrative, the full-blown mythology, unless it is self-isomorphic, which is what the model is attempting to achieve.
And that allows you to kind of process that narrative unfoldingly into its potential.
And I've said this before many times, but a long time ago now. Shit, just lost it.
We'll just say it again. Say it one more time.
Then it becomes the narrative about the narrative, and you're seeing this happen as I'm trying to describe this model about the narrative, as it's describing the narrative, which is itself a narrative. So, in other words, what the model is doing is making a narrative about narrative about narrative about narrative. Like, it's just always self-referential. There's nothing beyond the narrative, and that is the mechanism by which it achieves that isomorphism, by making everything that narrative, putting it back into mythology. So it doesn't matter if the narrative is wrong or right, It's the fact of it being the narrative which makes the mythology correct by virtue of being stated self-referentially. We're seeing a gap between the rationality part from going bottom up to why model. Right, like it's pretty much stated in that sense. So you have to go top bottom and start with myth and describe what myth is.
Always the thumbnail. Here's me going, cold biting my tongue.
I'm doing pretty good though. Because what I'm trying to do is interject only when I feel there's not enough picture image going on in the mind to work with.
But, like in this example of appropriating the word myth, all I wanted to do is make this tiniest, simplest point, and I couldn't get you off elaborating.
Right. It's because I misunderstood you.
Right.
Because once I understood you, what did I do? I said, right, that's not a point of contention at all.
Oh, yeah. And with that,
I would say it too.
we shall take a short break. Somebody.
So, to recap, myth is an obfuscated narrative, meaning you don't really have a grasp on the whole thing because of its construction and how it interrelates other mythologies into itself that may or may not be congruent with each other through the hyper narratives that exist to build it up.
Is the myth itself obfuscated?
Yes, the systemic myth.
That's
The unobfuscated.
I'd like to make that distinction.
Yeah, the unobfuscated attempt at making myth is this model which lumps everything into this narrative model, right? Narrative, hyper narrative, and then the squished together hyper meta narrative, which is more like a singularity. Things go in, but they don't come out, which is another metaphor for its obfuscation parameter, like a black hole, essentially. So the systemic myth is effectively inaccessible because it's all running through quantification processes, right? Everything is reduced to money, and then money makes the next move, and it doesn't connect the two pieces together in any meaningful way.
Yeah, again, your statement
Hence,
there confused me again just by not stating systemic. We're talking about systemic. Things don't go in, but they don't come out. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and in this case,
In other words, a download without upload, kind of that type of idea, where it just the mind just spews down through the body out into the environment, but never accepts feedback as to what happened. So what happened? Learn, change, do something.
Or you could call it a dysmorphism between download and upload. Because things do get uploaded, things do get downloaded, but they are not connected to there's no mythology to give that any meaning. And that's another way to look at what an obfuscated meta-narrative is. It's a mythology without meaning, whereas mythology has to give meaning, right? So it's like a misuse of what it is,
Right.
What we are saying it is.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's like a capital M meaning there.
Oh yeah. Meaning is the meaning is what gives context to each moment, like what happens in moments, right? Like why does one moment move from one moment to this one rather than this one? Because the meaning of that moment had something to drive it towards that disposition versus that disposition.
Mm-hmm.
In a holonic structure, you can't really guess what that is. It's like saying, I don't pick up this can just because...
This is uncertainty, isn't it?
Like, I'm not picking up this can because there's a collection of molecules here that hold in a specific arrangement to make up the can or whatever. I'm picking up this can because there's beer in it and it's in a can and I can drink it. That's the story I'm having with it. Right? So my action, my whole activity is narrated by this story. So meaning is like this technical, I guess, term, model speaking wise, that stipulates that there's a beginning, middle, and an end to any story. And what that is, so what you have done is captured by that story, and that story is its meaning. Right? Like I said, I'm not
like
picking
a
up
play-by-play kind of.
I'm not picking up an assortment of molecules. I'm picking up a can of beer. That's the difference in skipping a layer. Like you're not talking about the bottom facts. You're talking about why something is happening. It's a tough one to explain, but it's basically a qualitative assertion versus a quantitative one. There's no formula behind it. There's the quality of drinking one's beer is literally within that narrative. There's no going down for logic to go into it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so then, like within the myth we've gathered over living years of life, containers hold liquid.
Yeah. So, see, right there, myth does not have to relate to fantastical stories. Myth is just simply an accounting of something. That's where that word now becomes more useful, right? Like if you're going from top to bottom, you're just accounting of something. So this arrangement of molecules change in these certain ways due to the fact that I drink the beer. That's the top layer account is far more disconnected logically than it would be
Account, not recount. It's different. very different
Recount
words.
is just memory.
But accounting...
Accounting,
exactly.
recounting, it's working with the same stuff
different.
at different time slots.
We've appropriated accounting in a different way. And I feel like it's probably still valid here.
Yeah. Also, it relates to accountability, the way we did appropriate that, which is another reason why I like the term.
Accounting gives category to objects, I guess, in order to slot them into bigger systems.
Right. So if you have a narrative, you're breaking it up into moments. Each moment is categorized. At the very least, by being this moment versus that moment versus that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Take that further as you will.
The mind always, in order to think about things, it has to chunk them
Mhm.
like that.
And each moment is its own narrative. That could be broken down. Each moment, and those moments are their own narratives. That could be broken down, and so on it goes. It's literally all the way down to space and time. Where do you see shifts of space through time? Like, that's how you know there's something that happened from moment to moment. It was like this, then it was like that. That's the difference. It's nothing complicated, really. Like, it's not it's nowhere near the level of rocket science type shit that quantification gives you.
I think my angle here is kind of to trigger, like the thinking though. Some of the thinking is to be able to trigger so many people, especially, like, let's say the atheist, who I don't believe in stories or whatever. Are you kidding me? That's a sort of idea.
That's literally a story you believe.
Yeah, like you
I
just
don't-
you just made a statement.
I don't believe in stories is a story you've just
Yeah,
told.
right. So, like, that to me is that there's a lot of power in that appropriation of the term myth.
Yeah.
For that reason, because it points to mechanisms in cognition that are very structured, and we can pick them apart and analyze them as they happen, in order to inject the isomorphism, that the feedback,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're not stuck in this mode of, like, complete solidity, untouchable, right?
Yeah. So another reason for liking that word is because of its connection to dream. So the moments that make up the dream.
What word is connected with?
So mythology and dream.
Like, people don't associate them normally.
Right. But why I like this particular, because mythology is connected with things that are unreal.
To common parlance.
Yeah, exactly. So if you introduce dream into the same conversation,
Yeah.
if you will, you're kind of getting the same connotation. You're not getting the this
So
is
that's
reality.
that's like that's the 1-2 punch right there.
Yeah, that we are speaking to the same idea of myth, but not really.
Mm-hmm. But first it has to be unpacked, and then we see how well you're right, but
Right. It's still not different.
it is just a dream.
Yeah, and by dream we also referring to something specific.
That's another appropriated term.
Right. So with dream, we're talking about the distinction of each moment and the thing that the moments build into the running, quote unquote, simulation in the mind altogether.
Right.
That's what we're referring to as dream, and it could be waking, it could be sleeping. Sleep can be dreamless. That's something that the Hindus discovered earlier on. And the waking world can be also dreamless. And that is when you switch out the psychosis for the moment to presence in the moment. Psychosis for the dream to presence in the moment, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. No, that's
Immersion
that's
in the dream, presence in the moment. Yeah, there you go. lots of terms to wade through.
Mhm.
But
We've spent we've spent episodes on each of them for sure.
the idea here is to like contrast the systemic sort of
Mhm.
processing of it versus the
Yep.
model style of that myth.
The problem.
What it brings to the table and what it removes from the table, if you will.
Mhm. Yeah. So the problem is something like this psychosis causing a rigidly held view of reality.
Which is itself fed by obfuscation of the total myth.
This is also why I have many times in the past liked to bring up the the fact that we could all sort of think about, or in our own lives, that we were born without any of this. It was all acquired. So how is it a rigid, unchanging stone right now? How is that even possible when it literally wasn't there in our heads at some point in our life, but now it's an unchanging stone? Does that make any sense?
Well, if you bring commodification into the picture.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just trying to point
And
to
how that does it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So with that picture, literally suggests that the very first animal to be domesticated was the human being. And a domesticated human being isn't going to be nurtured by nature, so to speak. And it's that secondary nurturing element that detracts over time further and further and further away from that more natural state, if you will.
Right. And by nurture, you're giving like a negative connotation to the way that we're raised.
Not necessarily negative. It's just the fact that it's systemic nurture that makes it negative.
Yeah, and again, we always have to step away from that fact of kind of like, what's the end goal? Like nothing here or there is bad or whatever, but like,
Including the system.
Is there a healthy process happening? Which typically no.
Yeah, that's
the problem.
The
It's
issue.
not any particular teaching or education or thing someone learned. It's
Right.
like, is there a process happening, a life process?
That stitches it all together rather than leaving it in all disparate
Right.
categories of existence or existence.
Right. Yeah.
Like why I put existence into quotation. Like, we have a somewhat materialistic worldview, you and I together, right? We do acknowledge things like matter, we do acknowledge things like molecules, we do acknowledge things like atoms, we do acknowledge things like fundamental particles. Then there's a problem going down that route, though. If you were to ask a physicist what a fundamental particle is, they'll give you an equation on paper, because it's an abstract notion that is only observed indirectly. Like, there's a barrier into like what we think this is and what it is, and we can only work with what we think it is.
Yeah.
So
there's ways of inferring and all that kind of stuff. You smash particles, like certain masses of
What's
things, or energy changes.
But what's funny about this is that you keep going down layers from body to organs to cells to molecules. All of these are tangible things, right?
Not really. Through a microscope, maybe you can say.
Well, I
I
can touch this, right? Like, that's what I'm saying.
How dare you?
There is a sensual connection here.
I suppose.
And then you get down to like these fundamental particles, and the only way to describe them is go way back up into your brain, into abstraction mode, and think of formulas in mathematics and stuff like that. So you went further down only to reach back up. Forget what the purpose of this tangent was.
At every level it reached back up, quote unquote, just by reaching out, and I sensed there was a barrier or something. It's a story in your head still.
And the fact that we didn't even actually make physical contact, and it's just like different information systems sending signals to each other based on proximity.
Mm-hmm. So this all it all does sort of happen up here in some layers up here, even though we theorize and all have senses to see stuff.
Oh, I think the point I was trying to make is that even if you're trying to like be as realistic as possible with as materialistic as possible, you're landing in the land of mythology once you reach the equation layer, because then you're telling.
Well, don't say that, because it's always
No,
mythology.
the equations are narratives.
But it's still mythology before that point.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is that like the more you try to leave that behind, the further into it you embed yourself, because at the end of the day, you're stuck with, again, descriptions to believe in, to work from.
Yep.
So we're not talking about like how true or false they are, but the fact of the matter that you're still stuck with these narratives, even though they're very technical narratives. The story of how a particle unfolds, if you will, or whatever.
Okay, I see what you're doing. You're pushing it, the materialist worldview, to its limit. When a materialist would say, "Oh, I have skin, I have atoms, or molecules, I can look under a microscope and all this. It's right there. It's real. It's real."
And eventually,
But
you're
then,
stuck
okay,
telling yourself a story.
Yeah, like go dig
Sorry,
deeper, dig
sorry.
deeper, dig deeper.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're just into complete theoretics. Like, it's not even
String
material.
theory.
It doesn't feel material anymore.
String theory, gravity model. These are abstractions. They are stories. They're narratives.
Right.
And you're right back in the same.
The connection for me
space.
would be that you never left this space, even going through to looking at your skin.
You might have fooled yourself into thinking that, but that was that was you in that space telling yourself that story. Hence, also not leaving it by that measure.
That's what I mean. It's ubiquitous. That would be a term. Myth is ubiquitous.
So the question is do we leave the systemic version of model, which touches on all these tangential things, never finding any tangential things?
One of the words that you can't say, I won't correct you anymore.
Tangential. That's okay.
Tangent. Can you say
It's
tangent?
It's a word I read more often than
One of
I
those.
say.
Tangent. Just say tangent. Tangent. Tangenial.
What was I saying?
Proper pronunciation. I think you were trying to demonstrate a incorrect pronunciation of something, and then we were just going to move on. Pretty sure that was the story in my head. Yeah. Well, it's nice to have quiet moments to reflect a little bit. I'm just trying to pull it in my mind what we were talking about the last few episodes, at least.
Yeah, so check this out. So the question I was having is like the systemic model. It has all of these particles and all of these different things that it keeps talking about, but what it doesn't do is find any form of qualitative isomorphisms between its own applications. Like its own running mythology does not have anything to suggest that there should be any kind of isomorphisms between any of these areas of study.
By study, I feel like you mean through the senses, things coming in, and by quality, an isomorphism of quality, I feel like you're portraying this system that just crunches and mechanizes, but never can explain what we feel and sense.
Doesn't connect it to that element of it. The people that are really doing all of that, calculating all of that, there's no reflection back into what it all does. Yes, because it's all quantitative. You can only quantify.
Right.
And numbers mean fuck all
To the body.
to the body as such, without context, right? Like, yeah, it does matter if you had one meal or two meals.
Yeah.
but it's not like you need a calculator in order to make the connection in that sense. It's the hunger that does it. It's a very disconnected system in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And the coming back down to the body isn't something that people making and calculating rules are thinking about when they're managing society.
Right. If you notice, like when it's done professionally, it's done as a hodgepodge retrofitting. This is the running system that we want, but because it runs with people, we have to make extra accommodations, right? It's not.
Right.
It's the
So
alternative.
The Band-Aid approach.
Yeah, so the alternative, of course, will be like you're starting with the assumptions that you have people that are already meet all of that stuff, and then maybe a side project from that milieu can continue, right?
So,
already pre-supported.
To me, we're getting into economics.
That touches.
like.
That does touch on that. Yeah.
And like the idea of managing the society or managing a neighborhood or managing anything with people involved. Often the economic motive is set up for like profit motive type thing, and the only thing important is that whatever you're making, whatever you can make, let's say you can make something, as long as people are buying it, that's all that matters. So just make it and then somehow get them to buy it. That's because you can make it,
Demand and
get them to
supply.
buy it. So
Supply and demand.
supply and demand, our economics flips that
To demand
or
and supply.
I guess you could say like natural economics.
Gift economy.
We've called it gift economy before. It's a triggering term, but
It's established though.
the body makes demands. In other words, life has demands. There are things that need to be satisfied. That should be the primary driver of what
Right.
actually happens in the economy.
What you're saying is that the human existence, so to speak, precedes whatever rinky-dink project this is going to be.
Just because you can make some widgets, like who cares?
But systemically speaking, it's the other way around, where you have like your project and you make accommodations for the people as a side effect.
Yeah, it's like
That's like like it's essentially reversed in its
I can make seeds. I can make wheat seeds, but then I can also neuter them so that they can't make more seeds, and then I can sell seeds. Like, this is awesome, fantastic. That works so well.
That's going a little bit too far from
That's-
where I wanted.
That's the same idea.
It
That
is, it
that
is.
that perversion of supply and demand economics.
It is, but you're jumping a few layers above where it actually like feels like anything. I think. I'm just saying like.
I'm just in the mindset of the CEO of this company, Monsanto or whoever,
Normally-
whatever else.
Normally, something is going on. You try to inject yourself into that, and if they have the resources to support you or not support you, you can or cannot participate based on that.
And there's no point in even pointing out any
Whereas-
particular corporation or
Hold on,
anything.
But what I'm saying is that the way it should be is that you already have everything you need to support anybody for anything whatsoever, and the side project might siphon a little bit from the, skim from the top of the potential resources that are there already, pre-rendered for you.
Yeah, you mean like
To
for
move.
creative enterprise on top
So-
of that, or artistic?
So
or what?
lift the people up first, then they can do their thing.
Yeah.
Versus
No, I
making,
think we
making
can-
people desperate.
I think we
having
can
to do the thing just so they can survive.
take a break and get into this a little bit more, because this is why myth and all that's important to break down, because these are the things that continue the system the way as it is.
And what I just described is evidence for why there is a systemic myth happening. Because it's top down. Now, if you think about this, what's happened, what I just described is like you have this top down myth telling you what to do, and if you can retrofit yourself into it, it'll help you if it has the resources. So my point there being is that it's not so much that it's wrong or right or whatever, it's the fact that it comes from the top layer, which is the mythology. That's the argument there, that there is underlying mythology that gives everything meaning, regardless of
Yeah.
whether it's a true, false, or whatever story. We're not talking
But
about...
even like an isomorphic mythology will come from top down.
Yeah, in this case it's dysmorphic, and we're
Because
showing why.
it's in the most significant layers.
We're showing it's dysmorphic because the categorization it places individuals has nothing to do with the individuals, it has everything to do with the running myth.
Mhm.
The business idea, the goal of the
Right.
enterprise.
Well, let's take a break instead of standing over there.
Sorry.
And we shall be right back. Big one quite well.
So,
We're back.
we've covered a lot of ground for introducing what is really the essence of the term psychosis. Now, we've talked about...
I like that we brought in this the capitalist type of thing, like, and how the whole world is flipped upside down to service capital instead of the body itself being what's serviced,
That's the gist of that, yeah.
which is completely messed up, completely reversed.
Well,
of-
an impersonal system has no concern for health or well-being whatsoever, right? It's mechanical in nature, and
right,
that's
and we're all
this-
replaceable.
and the machine is an archetype for a reason. It's not itself in and of itself like another evil thing to rail on. It's
Yep.
just
We'll
what
always
it's
come back
doing-
to that
what,
sort of point.
what it's doing in its current format. That's the key that we're trying to associate with.
Right. And
So the model doesn't posit as anything as evil or non-evil. It's just that's the way things run.
to be clear, about that. I see this sort of alternative economics as not supplementary.
Which alternative?
It's more fundamental as
Gift?
like the gift economy, as being more fundamental than the whatever you call this.
Well, yeah, like to contextualize what we mean by gift economy.
Like it never went away. It can never go away. It's a part of life.
When you eat a piece of food, right? Your body doesn't go, wait a minute, this arm deserves more than that arm in terms of nutritional value, right? Like your body simply like does the job of distributing everything, right? Like this arm doesn't pay more than that arm to get whatever the fuck it needs.
Yeah,
it's
but
just
the left. What has the left arm ever done for me?
I'm trying to like I'm trying to like demonstrate where the notion of gift economy is actually coming from.
And that's what I meant by
there's
the
no leader cells.
Gift economy is more fundamental. It's always been there. It never went away.
Right.
It's just been completely overshadowed by this kind of cancerous form, if you will, of economics.
Like to
So I'm not proposing we get rid of this current system. I'm just saying that at least let's bring balance back so that people aren't dying and starving and
well, for one, this
shit
economic
lives.
system is the system that was traditionally, let's put that loose term into use. By tradition, I mean before civilization. The fact that it still exists, this traditional, if you will, economy, can be proved by one very simple scenario, description of a scenario.
The mother doesn't charge the baby for breast milk.
There you have it. Just like
where
that.
you were going with that.
Just like that.
It never went away. It can never go away. If it ever goes away, we're all dead. That's the only
effectively,
reason that the capitalist society or economy can exist is on the back of the gift economy.
It exists because of the fact that it hasn't killed us, which unfortunately it is hell bent
It's
on
very threatening.
doing it. Like
Seems.
one way or another.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to. We don't want to put
Dwell on that,
Put
yeah.
this animosity, this idea of like fight this or fight that. It's nothing.
No.
Nothing like that at all.
We're lamenting the fact of neglect by the system. The system is, without that self-reference bit in its own mythology, it has nothing to care
Right.
for to begin with. It doesn't care about anything except quantity and quantity again.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense it's
The paperclip maximizer.
in that sense it's like, yeah, it's there, but so long as it doesn't kill us, which eventually it will, and then that's the accelerationist part.
Mm-hmm. It's
Then-
like a long.
Then
it's a disease.
what is it for?
It's a
What,
long
what does it
disease.
have going for it after that? Well, what the fuck? Just ran itself into a wall at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's cancer has no morals or whatever.
Right.
Pardon
And a
me.
cancer is an apt metaphor for what's happening. It's the same functions, same cells, same proteins, same DNA,
Yeah.
doing things in a way that destroys the environment it's in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In essence, transforming it into a fucking wasteland.
Mm-hmm. And
And-
so here we are.
And in marketing speak, if as it were, the time it takes from a product to reach the landfill is about 6 months
On average.
on average. Any product.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally the same. That's the isomorphism. That's the cancer, if you will. This processing of
Mm-hmm.
our
Right. And I feel like
global body. If you
people
will.
can sense this, but they're so often driven through their own mythology to blame or attack others, systemic myths like, oh, it's your fault or it's your fault.
Well, that's the dream. That's getting stuck into this dream psychosis.
So it's really a wicked problem of that everyone seems to be stuck in their psychosis, and how do we kind of flip that to where, or what are the tools? Where are the tools that we can use to help people understand what is driving them?
Well, the tools is the model.
Because we have to look at ourselves in order to change ourselves. If we just blindly follow our own beliefs, and that's what everyone seems to be doing to the max, it's just a big destruction derby.
I shy away from even saying any of that personally. Like, we're not here to even.
I know.
We're not here to make.
As a purpose.
We
as
don't
a
want to
goal.
make you believe anything.
No, it's
I don't.
I'm pulling from my own frustrations
It's
that I've
rhetoric,
had
yeah.
over, say, even 10 years ago. I started writing about this kind of stuff, and just I know that it resonates with a lot of people who have kind of woken up to see like what is going on around
You
them.
don't need that qualifier, to be honest with you. There's no woke or unwoke people. It's a zeitgeist. The zeitgeist is a qualitative feeling without the rational exposition, right? Zeitgeist is the feeling, the collective soul, if you will, the quality of neglect
Mhm.
by the system. The very same thing I've been trying to discuss here. That neglect that it creates is also felt as a quality.
Yes.
And the collective quality of that
Yeah.
is the zeitgeist. And what I'm trying to say is that in some sense everybody quote unquote knows this, but what they don't have is a mythology to supplant that knowledge. There's like attempted hodgepodge mythologies, like various religions, various philosophies, scientism, spiritualism, like forget the structure, just do what feels good, which is another structure. All of these kinds of
Mhm.
elemental aspects to it.
Yeah, it's just like I went through it. I know a lot of people went through it, of feeling that, and sort of snapping out of like, okay, whatever is going on, like something isn't right at all, like fundamentally. And
Right. It caused you to circle back and to find the mythology that narrates what that lack is. Same reason why model speak materialized. It's to try to find that language that speaks to the quality, and in that language we wind up saying it's the zeitgeist. It's the quality of lack from the system. It's the quality of the narrative hijacking conceit together with self-reference to plant a self into its narratives to which things happen in said narrative.
making sense of it. Right. Uh-huh.
So,
And it
morality.
feels like when that pain, when the pain sensation comes in so hard, and it just can't be explained by your myth. Like the things that you've been taught to believe can no longer, like, it's so incongruent with the amount of pain that you're feeling for the world and what's going on, that this idea of your world, of how everything is and how it should work, sort of breaks. And that I think is, maybe there's a key moment there to where people kind of introspect more or try to learn about the world. I'm not saying it's a spiritual moment necessarily,
Myth shifting moment.
but it's like
the myth is what shifts.
and that itself is extremely painful. So you're like clawing and scratching, trying to find some solid ground when the amount of pain coming in can't be explained or softened by,
And not just
by
pain.
story.
I wouldn't qualify it as just pain.
Most often for people, I would think.
Pain is the most is what you're more sensitive to, but moments of pleasure as well. Like how the chasing the pink elephant, so to speak, always is a framework for not excitement. Regret and anxiety. Like chasing the pink elephant. The good feelings themselves
Yeah.
are also
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
are also like
They're like provisional kind of. They're metered out in certain quanta, and
Mhm.
and not having them is a pain in itself.
right, and the fleeting joy that you get from obtaining something, only to rest back into the pain of needing the next thing to obtain. Right, like it's fleeting.
Right.
So even in those, like if there's a sense of discontent, neglect, and you're just like something is always lacking.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it isn't merely pain that can bring you out of it. It's both. It's literally every experience.
Yeah.
Painting the very
I'm
same.
reminded of the
And it's painting the
Gautama
same. It's because
Buddha
yeah,
story.
It's because it's painting the same picture. Why
Prince leaving the palace.
Yeah, he had no. He was not a discontent individual, to put it mildly.
Right.
But also that story is an entire is what do you call it?
Mythological construct.
Embellished. It's very embellished. It's perfect, so to speak. I know of the more, say, scaled back mythology, and the narrative is more like, I myself am subject to death, aging, disease, and all of these ailments, so why would I take any kind of refuge in things that die, are diseased, become old, and are impermanent themselves?
Yeah, everything around him.
And with that realization, I'm paraphrasing, and with that realization, the hankering and the desire for things that decay, age, and die falls away.
Mm-hmm.
If I myself am subject to that, why would I venerate anything of that nature? That was sort of like the exposition that was laid out by the Buddha prior to the embellished story. So it was more like just recognizing, like,
Sure.
I'm subject to this. Why would I venerate that? I'm subject to this.
Yeah.
Why would I venerate that? I'm subject to this.
Well,
Why
I
would I
think
venerate?
a lot of times the
So what's left?
myth
The
itself,
undying, the unbind.
in
the
order to
unbound.
be useful, a mythological narrative has to be archetypal and
Right.
memorable. It has to be pushed towards perfection, so that it's like an extreme which people can easily pick out the extremes.
Funny. I mean, I'm using tangent in that a lot of criticism is aimed at Buddhism because the prince leaves his wife and child
Sure.
to quote unquote fend for themselves
Yes.
while he goes on his spiritual journey.
How will they survive in the palace?
Interesting point you make. That these are not the kind. This is not the kind of story that pits his wife up against the elements of nature.
Yeah, right.
He left knowing.
It'd be
like,
worse if he brought them
in the
with
story. Exactly, because he's a wanderer at that point.
Yeah.
So he's just like out in the open,
Yeah.
not exactly safe.
And
The other charge Buddhism gets a lot of flack for.
that's a moral argument, isn't it?
In a sense.
It seems like, and which we wanted to get into
Yeah, I'm
Um,
trying to build into it.
morality. I heard you.
So the other thing is
Almost
like
mentioned
how
it.
women were treated in early Buddhism, and it was like there was a bunch of laws about not traveling alone and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, hello, we're talking about vulnerable members of the community who could get attacked for being a woman, like just that alone. Obviously, for the context at the time, you don't want to go like, hey, yeah, do your own thing and like forget every possible precaution that normal people would take in that time for traveling like that. Right? So there's, yeah, obviously, but women are still raped and stuff. You see the point I'm trying to make?
No, I
Like,
did. I lost it.
So,
So he left his wife in the palace.
There were more stricter rules for women in early Buddhism.
Like you're saying,
that-
she wouldn't be allowed to travel,
Not allowed.
not to wander with.
Not so much as
It wouldn't
not
be
allowed.
moral?
Monastics are quite rigid on their rule sets, right? Like we're talking about people who embody the myth. Well, if you're trying to embody the myth and you're taking the reality into account, you still have to acknowledge that the world is more hostile towards women than it is towards men in general. Just vulnerability, the vulnerability spectrum is wider.
Are you talking about the people who got outraged that he left her?
I'm talking about people
Like,
who get outraged.
What's the context?
I'm talking about the people who get outraged that nuns had a different rule set to abide by than the monks,
Okay.
which was more elaborate.
Yeah, I get that, but why? So what does that have to do with her and the kid in the palace being left behind?
No, nothing.
Oh, I just
We
didn't
left-
get. I didn't get
we-
how
we-
that where the tangent went.
We left.
I don't know why we left. Where
We
did
left
it,
that.
where did it go?
Oh, I was just mentioning another element to Buddhists that gets criticism, and that's that women were
Right. Okay.
given a slightly different set of rules. Most of those set of rules was to basically keep them away from the men who would violate them,
Yeah.
and that's what is missing in the conversation about Buddhism.
Context. Yeah.
In that world, we're talking about 2,000 years ago. The likelihood, like, forget the Buddhist part. Just the land and the people in it, regardless of religion,
talking
regardless
about
of
India?
association, it doesn't matter which. It really doesn't matter which. Each civilized land is going through the
I
same
didn't want
problem.
to say it, but yeah. Yeah.
They're all commodifying women
Everywhere.
and children.
Everywhere.
For
Yeah.
sure. And men, muscle mass proximity.
Mm.
It's the same conversation. But in this case, the women are more vulnerable due
Okay.
to...
So that makes sense. That's fine.
So in the ancient world, yeah, fuck. Don't walk alone as a woman. That's
Mm-hmm.
not safe.
So.
It's not safe now, so what the fuck? But anyway, it's not something inherent to the nature of women per se. It's something inherent to the nature of the system, which takes advantage of anyone.
Yep. Right. I like the presentation of myth as something that's feels more like concrete and like immediate. Like, for example, when you walk up to a couch and go to sit on it, that's the sort of thing like
I am sitting on the couch is the myth.
couches, but also before you, yeah, like I am sitting on it now. Why?
No.
Because of what a couch is. It's getting into the ontology.
That's the myth. Yeah, and the myth describes
So
that
there's
ontology.
the myth and ontology connection, right?
Well, that's what the myth does describe. Like, when you really break it down, the myth talks nothing else except for what the ontology is supposed to work like.
Mm-hmm. Except it's in a
In the potential
a
state.
more narrative presentation, which our mind can sequence events
More
together.
narrative and more potential, much like the particle equations that we were talking about earlier. You know how they're like you know how the particle equations are about like the wave function. So it's all about probabilities and potential of what can happen, but it's never like it will do this, it will do that, it will do this, it will do that, it will do this. So myth sits in the same sort of superposition situation. I tried to allude to that earlier
Sure.
too.
Yep.
It's all about potential, but the actualities are
Um,
specific.
And delineated ontologically typically. Like, I guess this couch has 3 cushions, but if you sit in between them, it's a very hard part. And so I'm sitting on the couch is sort of like, well, you could sit in the wrong spot.
I have a great metaphor. The narrative is what happens when the myth wave function collapses. Right?
Sure.
You see what I'm saying? Like, the narrative still happens according to the rules of the mythology, but the mythology can't tell you which narrative it's going to be. Just that these are the valid routes. And the narrative, under a mythology, takes one of those valid routes.
It's a constraint.
It's just like a wave function collapse metaphor. Potential, actual, potential, actual. With the actual being the particle is actually there. We don't know where it's going now, though.
Right. And sort of like how we can step back and look at our world and, like, say this is society is happening and people are going to work and the economy is floating around and the invisible hand is, like, we can have all these ideas, but then
What's actually happening?
That is a car is
Bob
right
over here
there
now.
driving that way to work or
Yeah.
whatever.
Any car could be driving there, because this is a place for cars to be driven on. But which car, at what time, at which point, that's up to the situation.
Right.
It's kind of like guardrails. It just says what can happen and what cannot. Like where you cannot step outside, and it's not, or else it's not the myth anymore. But it can't tell you exactly, like, because of this that will happen. It's
Right.
more like again, the superposition
And
element.
it's like that because the way we encounter myth is through stories, through narrative, through chunks, through tiny chunks. So they all seem to, like, accumulate and crisscross these experiences that we have that paint a picture, a bigger picture, and that picture is sort of emergent. That's the
And
superposition.
not only that, but like those chunks are also touched by elements unseen within the chunks themselves. That's the
Sure.
hyper/meta stuff that comes into it. With hyper being like not obfuscated, but not necessarily showing isomorphism towards any other hyper narrative. Combine those two together, you lose the isomorphism entirely. Like, I need to eat, but I don't have any money. Those are very disconnected narratives. But they smush together into one giant meta-narrative, and out of which I have zero recourse, except for maybe this part of it, maybe that part of it, maybe this part of it. This company, that company may hire me.
Maybe you can start up a life of crime.
This conversation would be considered a crime in some spaces.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
with all of that, we come to a situation where we need to push back against what we said. Because at all of these points, we've been pushing towards solipsism. We're saying things like, essentially, like, you only get bits and pieces, you can only be sure of the things that you're interpreting, which tends to correlate with the idea of general solipsism.
Sure, yep.
And in the space of solipsism, reality doesn't really gets the same kind of scrutiny that you would have in objectivism. So the guiding principle isn't what's real, what isn't, but rather more like, what should I do, what shouldn't I do, which, if you think about it, is a moral question. So
You're talking about ways of orienting yourself.
Yeah, so
To
if
the
your
world.
if your myth is not objective, but entirely subjective, right? If you're pushed to that boundary in this sort of rhetoric, then it switches from what's real, what's not real, to question of what is this moral or is this immoral, aka should I not.
Mm-hmm.
Something else. The other category that moves stories forward. One of them is, does something exist? Does it not? The next one is, should I or should I not?
Mm-hmm.
And those are usually intertwined, which is why you don't find many scientismists, and pure spiritualists. You kind of get philosophers
Right.
and religious as the bulk of the contingency of the population, I guess.
Right. Well,
A mixture of the two.
there's a
Either you're more objectivist and inserting elements of
we'd say like
spiritualism,
spectrum.
solipsism into it,
Yes.
or you're solipsistic and you're inserting objectivism into it.
Because you can't be purely one or the other. It seems like
There's still a couch in front of you, kind of a deal, yeah.
even like as an objectivist, there's still a question of what should I do? Like just because so what should I do is maybe investigate the world to know it, to know what's real, what exists, and what doesn't.
Let's put it into
that's the
perspective.
should.
Let's put it into perspective, like in the scientismic sense, which is objectivism. Morality is not an issue. The question disappears. If you're spiritualismist, let me make sure I get the term correctly because I'm not trying to refer to spiritualists. I'm trying to
Spiritualismist.
Ismist, yes. The question of the existence and non-existence of things become less relevant.
Right.
That's the opposing dichotomy, if you will. But we don't have it set up as a line, we have it set up as a one dimension and then a second dimension going up. So you have quadrants of super objectivist, super solipsist.
I think we never found that
and
chart.
then you have objectivism fed by solipsism, and then you have solipsism fed by objectivism. So you start in a religionist sense, you start solipsistic. The mind is the arbiter of what's real, what's not, based on the questions of morality. Morality dictates reality, essentially, in this case, and you're trying to find objectivistic points to make your case. The flip side is you start objectivistic, where you're trying to find the existence of morality versus non-existence of morality, and that gives you a qualified sense of what that is, and then you get your justice system from that.
Right. And this all, of course, along the spectrum of stupidity.
That is the spectrum, yes. This four quadrant tapestry. You know how the Buddhists have the wheel of life and like this monster hugging
Sure.
it kind of a thing? It's the same idea. It's like you got, except it's divided into four things, with psychosis being like the monster, if you will, holding it.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we shall be right back. back on air. I was thinking we should pull up the small chart for that.
No, the big chart.
Both. I was looking for affect in the small chart, actually. There's just a thought that came to my head. Is that the small chart? No. Is it? It's too small. Ah, yes. So I feel like maybe we haven't explored this connection too much between this, what we call the spectrum of stupidity, between objectivism and solipsism.
You get this chart, right?
Yeah, and then so it's easy to understand how psychosis is a factor in all of that. It's kind of like binding to the real.
This is the real, yeah.
This is real. You're bound. It's static.
Neurosis is the connection that you're saying. The next moment I experience must be part of that reality. So it's not the moment driving the content of the dream. It's the content of the dream driving where the moment goes. Like a running algorithm. It can't go off track. You have to stay on track.
Also, I forgot to share the chat. Good thing nobody chatted.
So you know, like in a vinyl record, you place the needle into a track, and only unless there's something getting in the way of it, that the needle might bounce out of the track. Otherwise, it's stuck. Sort of like if I was in this moment, I need to go to that moment. Yeah. If I was in that moment, I need to go to this moment, and on and on. And the narrative is the thing that drives it. That's the circumstance I'm trying to eliminate. Whereas with
and is it because that feels good?
Well, yeah, you're on track. It gives you dopamine, right? Like
right,
rewarding you.
Okay, yeah, I never thought too much about it like that.
Well, that's what neurosis is supposed to kind of demonstrate, whereas immersion and sorry,
I know, but
not
what
immersion.
did I associate
Presence. Presence means like any little bump could move you to any track you need based on whatever that was where you've been. So you're on one track, the track is showing you something. Oh, boom, that should lead to a bounce into a different part of the narrative entirely. So like a CD would be able to skip and bounce around, whereas a vinyl record can't. Rough metaphor, very rough.
Sure, yep. Mm-hmm.
But the point is that neurosis is that you've been on this track, the track is going this way, you're sticking to that track as the next point, whereas presence means you acknowledge it, but you have the option to like bounce yourself off and land into a different spot.
It seems we are mapping out
the needle, I mean.
We're mapping out a process, an internal cognitive process, by which things first get reified, so solid concrete reality, where it's unquestioned, like that's a chair, this is that, that's a human, that sort of feeling of concrete reality. But then a neurosis on top of that, making it feel good that is what happens next and next and next. That's sort of...
It's more like to the lack of having a different context. Whether it's necessary or not is a different question. But it's the inability of framing a certain situation with multiple, say, mythologies. Or multiple aspects of the mythology. So, believing that this A is A.
It feels like inertia.
Yeah.
Whereas psychosis seems like something that could almost flip on or off, but when you have the inertia combined with that, it flips on and then it wants...
The neurosis provides the inertia for the psychosis to go on.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Like that's the inertia element of it. That's what you need neurosis for. because psychosis on its own
Right.
doesn't say much.
And
Being stuck to it
would be
does.
very fragile, because new information could come up, and you would
shatter
just,
the reality.
You
yeah.
would just go with that. Like, let's reconfigure. Let's process.
Yeah, I like the word inertia in this case because it actually points to the heart of what neurosis brings to the table. And incidentally, presence in the moment, which is like the opposing counterpoint from the model's perspective, is that inertia is just taken into its potential format, and it doesn't have to have an actualization until whatever part of the context is necessary for that to dissipate, right? So that's the biggest difference. It's like somebody's in your face yelling at you about your mother being a whore. Well, you can get hurt.
Then you beat them up.
You can get the emotional uprising, or you can look at them and be like, were you dropped on your head like when you were a child, or is there something else fundamental? Like you can have the attitude of I'm hurt based on what they've told me, or they've told me something that is supposed to be hurtful, but that makes them sound like a complete fucking moron. Which feeling do I choose to go with?
Yeah.
So you have different mythologies to be able to interact with, and neurosis is
different realities. In other words,
neurosis is the kind of thing that says, no, this is the one. This is the one. That has to be the one. He hurt you. Retaliate.
Right.
In general.
Yeah.
You wouldn't find that in the other response usually.
He hurt you. Just pulling up.
Who hurt you? Who hurt you?
Yeah.
Also, the autopilot's theme is in there. If you noticed, the psychosis and the neurosis is like essentially autopilot. There's one explanation only.
Let's
and it's
take
actually
a 2-second break. All right.
It's actually really, really well exemplified by objectivism and their premises. The way the objectivists talk about objectivism themselves, starting with Ayn Rand, she started off with postulating things like A is A. If it wasn't A, it would not be A, kind of a deal, right?
Obviously.
So,
Obviously, 1 equals 1.
It's
everybody knows that.
So basically, what I just described is like that hard objectivistic position, if you will.
Interesting. And so it sounds like the solipsistic side would be more just bound by experience of
Feel good.
Feelings. I was going to say, that momentum, the inertia.
Reward and punishment.
Pushed by affect more so than the objectivist who's like, oh, I'm so like the ivory tower. I am an ivory tower.
In one case, you have your affect generated through your observation. The other one is your observation is generated through your affect, if you will. So questions of reality are generally answered by affect being like ecstatic over the fact that a new discovery is made, or some logical formula has been created, or any of one of those extrinsic things that bring you a shot of dopamine,
whatever you predicted
into your system,
turned out to be true.
Yeah. Whereas on the other hand, you have your experiences, and then you're given the explanation after the fact, and that gives you the rush of dopamine again. So they're both reward and punishments, but one for extrinsic, the other for the intrinsic. Musing, if you will.
Yeah. And both are runaway, but this makes me think that the solipsistic side can tend to spin up a lot faster, maybe, without having to deal with pesky objectivity and all that.
Well,
in other words, mania and all that kind of just shooting off.
hate to be the one to do it, but let's bring politics into this a little bit, just a wee
Uh-oh.
bit.
That's it for the stream. Pack it up.
But did you notice that there is like a very very big similarity between that description and solipsistic tending towards the right,
Solips?
whereas the objectivistic tend towards the left.
I don't know if I could see that, but definitely the idea of spinning up in your head as the solipsistic side, as like
Well,
taking a side and
the right is generally defined by their sticking to the mythology, right? At the cost of
you
at
mean
the
like
cost of even sounding ridiculous.
conservatism.
Yeah, in general, tends towards that sort of mythological sort of not euphoric, a heaven to reach, like this myth of like we're gonna get to heaven or the promised land or whatever the fuck you want. We're gonna get there in sometime in the future. Don't forget, it's never now. It's always in the future.
Of course.
And then this tendency towards reshaping every story and narrative in terms of that main general push towards that promised land.
Mm-hmm.
So that's taking your solipsistic narrative and making everything outside of it fit into it. It's intrinsically made, and then everything from the outside is bent to be shaped like that. Hence why I'm moving the right to the solipsistic side. Whereas on the objectivistic side, which isn't any better,
I don't know. It's always so hard to pick apart because like the promised land through conservatism, the idea of conservatism, you could say maybe bound in objective observation of like how a family unit
that's not the point I'm
creates
making.
or
True, but the point I'm making is that the mythology preempts everything else. So you need the mythology first. You need your facts stated first, and then you make your evidence fit to the picture. That's the route you take. The other way around is that you have lots of facts making lots of different pictures and a lot of disagreements between said pictures, which also correlates to the way I've been describing the left being mostly against each other, right? Like the infighting of the left. This is it's perpetuated by the same problem that the incompleteness theorem presents. Yes, you can go from the bottom up, but your logical conclusions will not mash up at the top. So one starts at the top, goes to the bottom, and it messes up. One starts at the bottom and goes to the top, and that messes up. So they're both wrong in that sense, because solipsistic and objectivistic.
Okay, so you're saying
and both are stupid.
You're connecting objectivism with sensing of the world in testing and experimenting.
But making it fit into a specific narrative.
Sure.
So closed. You start off closed-minded, and then you don't allow facts to enter that mindset, or you start out open-mindedness, but your brain falls out and it doesn't absorb any facts anyway that do anything. In both cases, you're fucked, but in a different way, slightly different way. So, I've never actually praised the left. Have been mostly relegating them to the solipsistic side. It's tough to.
I thought you were saying objectivist side.
No, I'm putting the right side onto the objectivist side, which also corresponds with real world events.
Because that's what I was saying. Like
in which the conservative side has picked up
the fact of like
Rand's philosophies,
making a family or something, and the family unit and this kind of stuff over generations can be observed, and like this is the basis of tradition, and this is how healthy things have grown before.
So the family unit that is presented by the right side is its own mythology.
Oh,
It
yeah.
never actually
Yeah.
existed, right?
I'm not,
that-
I'm
that-
not, no, I'm
so
not denying that.
That's
I'm
what,
just
that's what
trying
I'm
to-
propping
I'm
as
trying to
an example.
trying to connect left or right, this political idea, with objective solipsism.
So-
we know that politics divides people into ways that they're not allowed to connect with each other to
So-
make the whole.
So we got right, we got left. Here you basically have your Nazis on the right side.
Under pure objectivists,
Yeah,
as opposed to the philosophical.
pure objectivist, but okay, you never get away from solipsism. So even this is riddled with it. The problem is that the approach to said mythology. So, in an objectivist sense, the only approach to mythology is rigorous calculation, essentially. But it doesn't mean what you're trying to calculate is objective in its own right. It could be a solipsistic notion.
Burp. Pardon me.
So this is more about approach rather than about what is that person. So if you're starting there, it's not that you're like that kind of person. It's that you're more inclined to start there. That's why I drew the arc that way. You start here. The arc goes beginning, middle, end.
It's from
right?
objectivist over to religionist.
Well, this is just
back
like a
to
random.
philosophist,
The-
and then over to spiritualist.
This is a random person, right? So we're talking about a scientist.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
potentially
audio articulate so people can, because nobody can see what you're pointing at.
yeah. So like in this example, we could be looking at somebody who is very much in the sciences, who's maybe a Catholic, who is really into philosophizing, and in the end comes to their own conclusions based on their feelings. That's an arc that one narrative could take.
Hmm.
Right?
Yep. That's many
So
episodes ago.
so
we went through this.
if you're the same person, why I'm talking about this arc in the first place, generally
Wish we
your
could pull
arcs,
up a chart for this, but we can't.
if you're the self-same repeating person, you repeat your thoughts over and over and over again, you might have this arc happening to you many times, and that's like your most solid trajectory. But sometimes you start here, go here, go here, go here. Right? So that would be a weaker arc. But this one will generally pop up more and more and more over the narrative. So you might have variations in the narrative,
course,
and this
yeah.
is how you get your hyper narratives, and this is how you get your obfuscated meta narratives, where this shit doesn't match at all. Like,
But of
can
course-
you imagine arcs like these?
Oh yeah.
Imagine a person like that. That's just fucking schizophrenic.
I've calculated arcs like that.
This is more like for you than for anybody.
Because nobody can see what you're scribbling on.
But yeah, like, so that's the landscape, and yeah, the real issue that objectivism and solipsism divides, if you will, is the question of reality, things in existence, and morality, actions.
Yeah. So, like, aside from the politics of which is on which side, maybe we can pick that up again later, or even after we. Why don't we try pick it up maybe after we discuss?
So,
like, what?
politics are interesting here because of their similarity to the situation. So, if you were to take politics the way they appear,
But most people don't.
and then
step
look at this
back
model
from politics. Like, this is
Yeah,
not.
I'm not
a
interested in that.
topic that can
This
be
is
used as
me and you.
a tool
No,
for explaining.
This is me and you having a conversation, though. What I'm trying to point at is that this spectrum of stupidity, if you're looking at the left and right divide in the political spectrum, you're starting to see how the model explains that. Like how the right is wedged into a specific mythology, how the left is wedged into obfuscation of mythology, like literally refusing any consistency. One is on like trying to unobfuscate it, but the wrong way. The other one is saying that there is no right way to deobfuscate it and to begin with, and that's the point of contention.
No, I get that on a general, like on a general level, that the right, quote unquote, tends to be more unified in their narrative, and there's like, this is where the Nazi attack comes in, and the left,
but they're not, because they're not unified with nature.
The left seems to be more understanding of the different perspectives that could possibly be bubbling up to create such grand narratives, but there's a disconnect between how to make that grand narrative, which satisfies all of these parts.
So one assumes the grand narrative
while fucking over the parts.
One can never come up to a grand narrative
while thinking it is the parts,
and also fucking over the parts.
Right.
At the end of the day, everybody fucks over the parts, which is why it makes it an oppositeness situation.
Right.
At the end of the day, nobody's there for you.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And so, if you go further and further right, you land at Nazism. If you go further and further left, you land at it's basically Nazism under a different space. Like they all sport so from
it's
the
anti-Nazism.
So from the left's
anti-Nazism,
here's what it becomes the same as, is because in its effort to deny a grand narrative, it creates another grand narrative to supplant it, and thus also manufactures the same outcomes.
So it's sort of like denying an existence of something which is there.
So nobody's free under pure communism. Nobody's free under pure Nazism.
This
literally nobody's
communism
free.
You threw in there.
Communism. I'm talking about, like, I said pure to try to push it as far left as possible. What's
sure,
I don't know
like
what the counterpart to Nazism on
it's
the
all
right is.
Totalitarianism, typically.
Right, that's what I'm saying, and in both cases winds up being a similar situation. What's different is the contract. In the communist contract, supposedly the people working the machinery are its owners, despite the fact that they can't do fuck all with it after the fact. On the other side, you have the owners being the owners, despite the fact that they can do anything with it without the workers.
Right.
So ultimately, it breeds the exact same situation.
Yeah. So I'm thinking.
So communism was meant to be like the trigger word to oppose Nazism. But if you have a better one, sure, just throw it in.
No,
there.
as far as like, that's probably what most people think. Commies and all that. Left commies and the right Nazis. Yep. So we're trying, or we're expressing language, which can incorporate all of this to holism. That would be the ideal. Not to keep fighting each other and using dead end strategies, which lead to Nazis or commies, and everybody dies.
Speaking of dead end strategies, our title is Neurosis of Morality. Check this out. Nazis, communists, anything in between, they're always using one specific gimmick: moral outrage.
Right.
sort of to like tie everything back into there is no objectivism without solipsism. There's strong objectivism, but it's still in solipsism, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
the morality aspect seems to have a movement to it, an action.
right,
Whereas objectivism could just be like, well, I believe this, that's real, this is real. Okay.
Them's are facts. Yeah,
It's all in my head.
but whether I should do something, whether I should
Right.
not do something, that's the moral question.
Every system must tap into that. Otherwise, you just have people believing or not believing things. Who cares?
Either it's incidental or it's overt, covert, overt, whatever.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, so that's where we're landing with that. That's the comparison for the political system, actually. That should make sense in general, in that
Yeah.
how you have
okay
all
with
of
that
these positions
so far.
to begin with, and the model literally fucking models that.
Hmm.
Now, with the question of politics, why it's an interesting one, I feel personally, is that if you think about it, politics and mythology, they're like exactly the same thing that we're talking about here, in some sense. Like, if you were to bring the mythology of politics as an example for what we're talking about, it clarifies this very picture. That this is a very concrete.
I think so.
It's a very concrete example of
That's
this
the hope.
abstract idea.
Yep. Well, we're seeing like dichotomies, so things split up between so spectrums with extremes. If we're observing spectrums with extremes inside of normal cognition, of course a political system which is getting people to act and move is exploiting those, and the divide and conquer has been known forever. So we should see pretty clean lines here, and the fact that we kind of are points to
Well, check
maybe
out this
it's some
ideolo-
isomorphism.
So check out this ideological arc.
Which one? You drew like 20 over top
No,
of
no,
each
this
other.
this one, the one that keeps repeating itself over and over and over and over. The strongest
for that
of them all.
for that guy.
Yeah, for that guy. Talking about exploitation. If you can get a read on this ideological arc, you can implant things into the mythology, right, that strengthens or mutes this arc.
Sure.
Charlatanism. What charlatanism is involved with. We've talked about charlatanism picking back on the narrative and reinforcing it, reinforcing the psychosis, reinforcing the neurosis. This is how. And this reinforcement is getting you to be more and more neurotic, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Can I call a break?
Yeah.
Then I shall do, and we shall be back. I like that kind of like two-part punch to
Can you try to
to
paraphrase
having
that?
the wool of reality pulled over your eyes. I'm imagining like where somebody insulted your mother, right? Um,
Your mother is a whore.
First off, there's no questioning of that. You have a mother. Mother is this valuable and person to you, who somebody else is saying something. The reality of like
Whore being an insult.
right, like dicks going places and all this kind of
And if you believe all of that is unacceptable.
right. And so like this as being a reality. So when it says the message comes to you like your mother is a whore, that's the statement coming to you. You already know exactly what is meant and said by that, unquestioningly. There's not like, well, who really is my mother? Like, this person took care of me. Like,
What are whores?
This person raised me. Right, and like, well, everybody, like, many people had, have sex or whatever, and like, all these kind of things, like, right away.
Acceptable, unacceptable
So the
forms of it?
message has come to you in your brain immediately, and it's reified, because this is the world you live in, and a message has come to you with this. So its meaning is unquestioned. As to what has been told to you, the meaning is unquestioned. So that's the psychosis element, that you're in this kind of thing where this is the reality. Neurosis element, being that fact that somebody has kind of insulted you or egged you on, means that now you have to do something, this next part.
For example, be insulted.
So an insult came in. Now, no matter, you can't just like step back and say, well, like, take a breath.
That was an insult
It's
that
like,
I don't care about.
it hits you, and it bounces in that moment. It bounces right into its exact narrative. So the dream never stopped, even though in that moment you had a decision point.
So the connection point, if I may just interject.
And this is psychosis and then neurosis happening.
It goes from I insulted you to I am insulted by you.
Right.
Right. So that's where the dream does not skip its beat. The insult was taken as insult. Whereas that's the psychosis of being like the narrative is driving the outcome of the next moment and the next moment and the next moment, in juxtaposition to immersion and presence in the moment of immersion being recognizing something like an insult was spoken to me, but presence also dictating like I have a choice of being insulted, not being insulted. There's a whole
immersion.
I have all of these options.
Immersion being, I think it's a good word, as opposed
presence.
to psychosis, being portrayed as like the unquestioning reality that you're in. Like, you don't have a choice. That this is the feeling of it. It just comes to you. Reality is given to you.
So you're still recognizing the same things.
Yes, in immersion, when you're immersed in the world around you,
the dream.
that just means you're sharing the dream with other people, and a chair is a chair, and that's not a bad thing.
Right, like sure, sit on it, sure,
Right.
stand on it, whatever.
And so with neurosis, we have people within this dream of understanding, just being prodded and pushed like a pinball through a machine, through this machine, and instead of being able to, let's say a paddle knocks you, you're the ball, you can react to it by just going exactly where it shot you,
Or
you don't have to.
Or you can go like this and go.
What?
Oh,
Right.
there's movement in that direction.
So there's a distinction
and
to
I
be
may
made,
or
yeah.
may not want to go
Yeah,
there.
you've been pushed this way. Okay.
Who are you, and why are you pushing me?
Yeah. Right. And that would be the presence in the moment, and it's another great term, because to be present is to process what's happening fully, but not just reacting like boom.
A good word for this is not identifying with it.
Sure.
So in Buddhist parlance, usually the exercise goes like this.
The
What
identifying
had just
is a
happened is not me, is not
psychosis.
myself, isn't part of me. It is a phenomena that exists outside
Right.
of the question of me
Yeah.
or not me.
It all seems fluffy, but
So
this is how we
goes back right to affect.
this is how we're able to deconstruct the levers and buttons which are pushing and prodding us constantly by the system.
Well, I did say this is not like the kind
in
of
politics and in war, in everything.
It doesn't have the kind of complexity that, say, rocket science would offer. Because ultimately the model is one of experience, right? And so we're tapping into something that's more universal in a sense. So the nomenclature might be alien, right? But the experiences that they are referring to aren't. So once you put the two together, the difficulty level
Yeah.
is actually reduced significantly.
It's so like it's kind of frustrating how we've spent years building up this model, but really like
It's a feature.
it's kind of simple.
So I've said this before. The more something is simple,
Yeah.
the more words actually are involved in honing in on that aspect.
Right. And it becomes a strategy of how do you say or communicate
Yeah,
in
balance that
ways
out.
that bring people there into an understanding of it.
Well, I don't think I've ever wanted to bring people in. And I'm not saying this is
again,
like I'm not saying this is antisocially.
I'm
saying
harking back to my own experience.
It's a
and-
filter.
and desires.
Sure, I have the
Which
same.
I've
I
gone
do
through.
have the same desires, but they're not manifested in the same way. I would say, yes, it would be better if it was more common knowledge. The prospect of making it common knowledge is a guaranteed way to make it not, so to speak. So
I disagree. Although
broadcast is a systemic affair.
I
Right.
agree, there's no non-broadcast. It's all broadcast.
Sure. There is that, but if broadcast is mediated,
Which it all is.
then you're just going to run into you spread the message out and it hits a wall. You
my
spread the
problem,
message out and it hits a wall.
That's fine. That's totally fine. My problem, which I
It won't-
think you're getting at or want to get at,
It won't
is
get
that
past the obfuscation
I have learned
elements.
I have learned
of
not
mythology.
to say attach my identity to a certain outcome of such a
Yeah.
thing. Like
That's what this amounts to. Yes.
bah, whatever.
That's what this amounts to. So I guess I'm just trying to be carefully worded in the sense is that, and we're not trying to gather
Yeah.
folk, if it will,
And, like, if
to agree with us.
something happen or don't happen, it doesn't.
It's not a populism. I'm not interested in this idea being popular.
No, but we are designing something. We're designing a language, which is meant to be understandable and usable.
Yes, and I'm clarifying that intent. That is the intent. Usable, clear.
And as a language, it's not up to anybody, any one of us,
tool.
me, you.
a
Languages get shared and spread. That's all it is.
Yeah, and if it cannot be anything but a tool. Now back to morality, and that's an interesting question.
I'm having trouble reconciling what people normally think of what is moral, as in right or wrong,
I have
and
modeled this.
what we've just been talking about, which is the inertia of the affect inertia, where the dream supplants the moment and says what the next outcome is, rather than the moment itself determining what the next outcome is.
So which question about morality is unclear?
Just that most people think morality is a set of rules in society of what's good and what's bad for people to do.
That's morality, not capital M morality. the distinction being made is quantification. And I think we've talked about this before, but I recall explaining something to the effect of, when you have a quantified sense of morality, what you have is a list of do's and don'ts. And that list eventually, over time, gets reduced in the do's department and expanded on the don'ts.
Sure, typically in a society, because what else, systemically, what can you do? There's no generative function in a system.
Which, to accelerate this a little further, winds up in being basically one single rule of don't fuck with the system.
Sure, that's the one commandment.
That's, yeah, basically. And
Agreed.
And every essentially, like, the reward punishment system moves away from reward towards punishment over and over and over and over and over again until there's nothing left in the reward situation. The only reward
Sure.
becomes not to get punished.
That's a normal morality in
That's
society.
that's our justice system. The
Typically-
penalty system.
Yep,
the,
all the things
the
you
shunning
can't.
system,
It's more of what you can't do. Agreed.
or else you get shunned.
But still, how does this relate to something like in the moment, deciding that I'm going to use what narrative is going on currently and just blast with that over the moment, screw the moment? That's what we're talking about, neurosis of
So
morality.
you'd have a quantification step.
Capital M morality. So there's like morality.
Oh.
There's reality.
Okay, so-
morality is inertia.
So
That's how we seem to be defining it.
So
It
from
is
the
inertia.
you're looking at all of these questions, both reality and morality, that is, from the perspective of the system, which is runaway.
Yeah.
But those appear within presence and immersion. So the difference is that within presence and immersion, which occur at the very same time, for example,
Right. So reality, morality, not bad things.
in
But if we introduce
in
feedback,
presence and immersion, all moments are real and moral. So qualified by their reality and morality. They are real in the sense of their being the phenomena. The phenomena itself is the reality of it. And morality is a quality of that phenomena. What was the moral tone, if you will, shade, if you will, of that moment. Every moment has a shade of morality. That morality is that, what you would call it, that inertia. How does one moment push into the next moment,
Yeah.
pushes it into the next
that's
moment?
what I'm thinking.
That's what morality answers. Why move from here to there instead of from there to here?
But it's like, because we always have. And why do we always do it that way? Because it either avoids pain or continues a pleasure response.
An answer provided by the mythology that is congruent with that dream and moment and context that it presents. So what's moral in this context will not necessarily be moral in that context. So when I'm saying it's painting a brush of morality, I'm not talking about like this universal set of rules, and I'm not talking about an arbitrary set of rules,
Yep.
but rather, what did that context present itself in terms of morality? So the context presents itself is the existence question answered.
But
the
we
quality
are
of its direction
we are
is
always,
the morality question answered.
We are always talking about an affect-based response with morality, right?
So affect would place the self-reference in its proper slot in the narrative, provided conceit is out of the question.
Sure.
So what
Yeah.
affect does is it
And
presents
that would be like presence.
is it presents a narrative from a perspective of the observer. Where is the observer in that moment? That's what affect really solves. So to make sense of the narrative, you have to place the self-reference in outside or inside or in totality or in a part
it's
of.
calculated as either good or bad sort of thing. Like
That's
this is a
conceit.
good-
No, conceit is what does that.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Forget that calculation. To begin with, don't compare. If you don't compare the self-reference as better or worse or any of that stuff, simply as is, that was part of the narrative moment. The morality of the question is no longer hinged on the dream that was presented to it. It's based on the very fact of the moment being there, being present in that moment, and seeing what the moral options really are.
And is it still in that case based on an affect? In other words,
Well, self-reference
feeling
is
of
inescapable.
positive, negative, neutral
No, affect doesn't affect.
presence.
Oh, sorry. So affect is intertwined with self-reference, but there will be pleasure and pain. Conceit will take the pleasure and pain and move it into further into
Like craving and
avoidance, aversion,
aversion.
and callousness, right? So it's a formulation of the narrative in that way, in which
Right.
way the self-reference is going to be slotted as a self after the fact.
Right.
I
guess
have been punished is one of those ways of slotting it. I have been rewarded is another way of being slotting it.
So we have this like reality established, and then within that we're talking about this idea of inertia, which is based in past experiences typically, I guess, like a build-up of experiences, which means that the next moment must mean something. Like through, like you just go through that moment and it means this automatically based on that inertia, the build-up.
And the inability to avoid that is the neurosis.
And right, okay, yep. So, but yet there still is this. The affect is still there, no matter what. But you have. The alternative way is altruism.
Affect is like a messenger from the bottom up, so to speak. Affect refers to this being pleasant, this being unpleasant, any one of those things that are just like qualitative aspects of the moment at hand. This moment presents pain. This moment presents pleasure.
I'm just trying to distinguish between presence and morality, and it seems like morality has the inertia and presence can ignore the inertia.
So,
but I don't know if that's right because we learn how to react.
Okay, I'll try. Psychosis and neurosis latch onto this is real, this is moral. This is not real, that is not moral. That's what they latch onto. This is the definition of words, if you will.
And by moral, it's like the channels that you've been driven into, which are normal.
It's quantifiable.
So someone insults your mom, you automatically punch them. Reality aside, that's already everybody understands.
The system must.
This is
how the system reacts.
The story is progressing, right? So
and that's the correct way to do it. And sticking to that's the neurosis.
Mm-hmm.
Presence and
immersion, presence.
Immersion and presence see all of the events as the tapestry of reality. So you're not thinking about is this real or this not real. You're thinking about this happened. That's the reality, right? Like it's a phenomenological. instead of
Right.
materialistic. You're not talking about existence if this object exists or if that object exists. You're saying this moment exists, that moment exists, that moment existed, this moment existed, and so on and so forth. So it's narrowed down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those moments, each and every single one of them, have what I would be calling moral qualities, pushing towards this end, that end. This makes sense. The morality question is, am I going with the meaning of the myth, or am I going against the meaning of that myth? Like, it's still fairly arbitrary in that sense. The point being is that myth creates the meaning of what your actions, and the choice of your actions could mean
And we're
moral to that myth or immoral.
we can
or,
link
or
affect
disconnected.
We can
from
link
that.
affect in there by simply the pleasure of what you thought is real as what's happening.
The myth,
the connection.
the myth throwing back a reward, the myth throwing back a punishment, the myth throwing back nothing. Feedback. It's the feedback. So, from the perspective of immersion and presence, you don't need to question whether anything is real. You don't need to question whether anything is moral or amoral.
Right.
Specifically, you already know that that's the model speaking, every single moment is a tapestry of its own reality and a tapestry of its own morality, as it is contextualized by whatever dream they appear in.
Sure, yeah.
And being present and immersed in that would also mean being cognizant of that happening at the time, and being able to meta-mythologize that into the real mythology, retaining the isomorphism of your meta-myth into a single narrative without having to stray and obfuscate anything.
I typically describe something like that as stepping back. From whatever is going on, step back.
Well, I did say meta.
Take a moment. That ability to do so is really kind of what we're
And having the
there.
time to do so, which the system is
Sometimes
very
you don't.
insistent on not giving
Denying,
to you.
yeah. Right.
I'm in that boat myself right
But
now.
it can be so important. Instead of like the experience of this is that we react very quickly to things that just happen to us. That's in the neurosis. Something happens, it's a happening. It's not your like grand idea of what's real and what's not, but events are happening and a reaction is happening. That's neurosis, right? It's kind of distinguishing a bit.
And the sad fact is that we're mostly in that state. Like a lot of us, and myself included, yourself
It's
included.
normal, and for most things,
We've
actually
we've
desirable.
normalized it for ourselves.
It's desirable for in most cases to be like that.
Desirable is an interesting word here.
Let's say.
No,
That's
let's not.
provocative.
Let's not.
Um,
I'm actually triggered by that phrase at this point.
desirable. Yeah, I threw that in there
let's
too.
say.
My purpose there is that
If you're a Ben Shapiro
Um,
fan, my condolences.
my purpose. Let's say, who said that? Did you? Who said it?
I just did. It's
Okay.
it's just a sad fact.
Right.
It would be.
Just that, let's say you're going to work and you're doing
Let's
your
say.
job. For example, let's say perhaps an
We should
example.
we should actually have the words "let's say" appear
It has to.
on the screen as people as we say it. Let's say.
How do you do that?
I don't know.
I don't think I can do it. But anyways, you're going to work and you're doing your job. Well, nothing is happening that's changing. Like you're just working the land. Let's say, for example. Suppose, if you will.
So you didn't collect any fruits for your labors. You just labored. and the fruits are hypothetical in a banking account.
Can we do it? Yes.
Shapiro, this is to you.
Was that a
Or-
middle finger? Yeah, so you're at your job, doing your thing, nothing changes. Like, you don't need to be, like, really, presence immersion. It's kind of the same thing if you're not.
In
You're
fact,
just
in
doing
fact-
a thing. You're putting yourself into
In fact, it's
mechanism mode.
beneficial for you to just clock right the fuck out and wake up.
That's what I'm saying.
when-
Yeah, after
when
you're
you're
done.
done.
Yeah. Which then, maybe. Yeah, like, I feel like there's a natural element to that.
That we clock out. That's just, that.
Well,
that,
I know-
that's more of a pointer towards the model rather than the
Yeah.
system. We don't want to be there, so we're not there.
Yeah.
We
True.
don't want those moments to be part of our run-in mythology. We don't want. Well, some people do actually want to be defined by those activities, which is probably one of my main.
Here it is. There's maybe a hierarchy of importance, you could say, of which activities really need to be continuously and carefully reanalyzed in presence or whatever, and then some that just are not, like, that don't matter. Like, I don't need to keep thinking about, am I walking properly right now, or is my posture okay? All right.
I think the guild dynamics cover that situation pretty perfectly, because the idea is to, like, start to focus on oneself and then emerge out, right? So to answer your question, is like, if what I'm doing moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, well, focus is really meant to answer that question. Is like, are you being hygienic? Are you being nutrition? Is
Yeah.
there nutrition coming in?
I see what you're saying.
Coming in.
I think.
Is there garbage going out?
And there's-
is there good stuff coming in?
No matter what our activity is,
Is there a place for restitude, and is there a place for activity?
point
rest
taken,
and
I
fitness.
think. Because no matter what we're doing, there's
And
always
from that
there's
center-
always a healthier and better way of doing it somehow, which I think we would forget if we're just
Incidentally,
clocking out.
it seems way too selfish to the system, because what does the focus regime entail? Ignore the system until
For
you
other
get
things.
yourself up into being a functional.
because you're paying attention
Participant in
to
it.
things aside from the work itself. You are paying attention to making sure the work can keep happening. Which, who gives a fuck about that?
May as well just go die.
Yeah, you're replaceable. Just shuffle off and let's hire another one.
Yep.
Right.
Don't I know this?
Yeah. So yeah, that's my point was there's a bit of a subtlety in that we do clock out a lot of our reality, and that's kind of normal, but it's not really healthy necessarily, and we never know unless we were present.
No, it's definitely not healthy,
It seems like it can't be.
and it's actually a descriptor of what the problem really is.
It's a coping.
Yeah, you shouldn't. There is no realistic reason, except from the abstraction of civilization, that states that you must be forever bound to work for survival. That it simply has not been the case for anything in nature.
Let's say a screensaver happens. Do you know that one? Do 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 do. All right, we can hide that. We'll save it for later. It'll come back.
I don't know if you remember my stipulation for the guild environment work culture. But to speak to these points directly, it entails of entirely voluntary work. You're not working to do anything for yourself.
What if everybody just lies in bed all day?
Why would they?
Then there's no harvest left.
Why would they do that?
Then they're gonna die.
Why would they do that?
I'm just because they're lazy bums. That's why.
Well, why would you?
Every last one
Why
of
would
us.
you think that?
Yeah. No, it sure appears.
Humanity has never shied away from the self-sustaining labor to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to. You don't have to throw in shiny pebbles in order for it to work and make it happen.
No, actually,
a point that you've
on the
raised
contrary,
many times.
On the contrary, I believe that people love to be a part of the world around themselves and to lift it up and sustain growth, to be part of life.
To become a symbol.
We are life.
Well, to become a symbol of their own right, if you will. A functional element that leaves an artifact onto the grand landscape of things. Of course.
Yeah, that seems kind of like systemically thought.
Well, yes, but
As
I'm
in
also
legacy and all that.
But it's also model. Signals, signals, symbols, signs, artifacts, memes.
That's
all.
like
It's a repetition of that.
I could be. It's hard to say biased, but like I've always had like an artistic kind of like creative drive to build things and that. I don't know if everybody has it, but everybody doesn't have to have it.
Self-reference, self in story, in narrative, conceit, and
I think it's beaten down.
The main, remember, there's also such a thing called the main meme of the memeplex. So you know how in your vision, you have your points of like what you're looking at, and then everything is peripheral. The memeplex is essentially effectively like that.
So the focus points.
So self-reference, self-making in narrative, main meme, affect, proximity complex. Those are all the formative bits that state what this moment presented to you, where you are in this moment, whatever you is, and how that story progresses next. Right? Like, so you have all of these different interconnecting pieces that in the neurosis sense make that a reality, in the model sense make that a moment, the qualities of the moment.
I'm gonna have to call another break.
Likewise.
Sweet. And we'll be right back. Let us say.
Let us smoke.
Let us say. Oop. What? Let's say.
All right. So,
How did this get over there? Da-na-na. Well, I like the. I feel like the direction has been pretty solid this time somehow. I don't know why. What's different? I feel like we've been on track though.
the best connection that I've heard explained between solipsism and morality was actually coined by Eon. It would have been
Master Eon.
it would have been like many, many, many moons ago at this point. So searching for that exact message would have been unrealistic at this point.
Okay, so connection between what? Solipsism.
Morality, like why objectivism tends towards reality as its pivotal point,
Yeah.
while solipsism hinges on morality. And it has to do with everything, with the fact that everything is internalized, and so you don't have a rational perspective from which to move off of. Only the
There's
moral,
no alternative.
Yeah, only the
in other
moral
words.
perspective, the
So
do's and the don'ts
The
dictate.
the vast universe of reality is not so much outwardly crafted through feedback, careful, like scientific type stuff, experimentation.
Yeah, it's not about the factual existence or not existence of things. It's about like the moralistic compass that dictates which direction is
right.
left based on
But
all of the rules that are invented.
Of course,
with or
it's
without
a
reference to reality.
it's a blind side, not to give objectivism so much credit, but it's something neglected in the
Well,
solipsist.
you and I land on the objectivist side in terms of our particular spectrum.
This
This is just like the pragmatist
debate,
and
I
the
believe, yeah.
academic. That's
Mhm.
sort of like their forte. It's also in the four quadrants. It's basically it's also retrofitted for all the temperaments. If you think about it, going from the academic
So, like,
to the pragmatic
instead
to
of
the
instead of
devotional
making
and-
predictions about the world based on your beautiful, perfect reality, understanding of reality, making prediction at feeling good. Instead of that, it's not. It's more like the inner reality, which can be so much more wild, I guess, in its players in what's
It would require
happening.
less prediction because it's repetitive, also. So you're moving away from trying to make predictions to begin with to like not doing that whatsoever.
And we're typically finding that a niche is found and then it's just dig right in. That's what I would expect.
Niche in what sense?
In the sense of
Systemic?
this is the right thing to do.
Mm.
When I do it, it feels good. Therefore, I keep doing it. It's boom. Now it's basically imprinted forever.
So referring back to this squiggly line that I've made, it's like the reinforcement of the arc over and over and over. Repeat.
Right.
Having that arc
But
appear.
within solipsism, what is like there must be still a
Well, you're not only solipsistic.
governing factor.
Well, you're not only solipsistic. Like, you might not necessarily make rational connections between the table, the chair,
But,
sitting down, and all of
yeah,
those things,
I
but they
think you
still
don't-
appear to you.
Of course, there's always going to be that intrusion, if you will, but also your predictions of what is going to end up feeling good.
What's
is
interesting is
going to
that-
be wrong at some points,
What's interesting
and
is
you're
that
going to have to confront that.
So what's interesting is that you keep mentioning the word prediction.
That's what we do.
Well, let's step back a little, back into the conversation slightly. Recall the dream, and the psychosis and the neurosis having to do with the dream. Now the dream is moment by moment by moment by moment, but it has a past and it has a future.
Sure.
Right? And past in the neurosis sense, the psychosis sense, means regret. Future is anxiety. Why those particular why that nomenclature?
No, no, there's the
because-
positive side too, right? Like you gave that point. It can be regret. It can also be like feelings of great things of the past that you keep doing. It's just the flip side
Look,
of it, right?
you still get regret because the good moment isn't repeating itself.
Okay.
Back to Buddhism. Pleasure is pleasant in arrival, painful in its receding.
Yeah.
Pain is painful in its arrival, pleasant in its receding.
I see what you're saying as a mechanism, a driving mechanism.
So it kind of makes it moot, if you will.
To try and do something in the past that was pleasurable, it's not feeling good. That's not the reason why you're doing it again. It feels bad that it's not there. It's a regret.
Right. So long as there is a connection, neurosis connection to that dream, regardless of what the past is, pleasant, painful, whatever, regret. Regardless of what the future is, painful, pleasant, whatever, anxiety. Will I succeed? Will I fail in bringing in the past to fruition again?
Right.
So I started this off talking about what you were saying. I said, isn't it funny that you keep mentioning that word?
Yeah, prediction.
Prediction. Notice what I'm describing and what you're talking about are in a similar boat,
Yeah.
and both of
dream.
those boats are neurosis towards the dream, psychosis in the dream, not presence, not immersion. Right? So that's where that
Right.
comes up.
Okay. I'm trying to remember.
Sorry to take it all down like that, but
No, I know. I'm just trying to remember my own context, but that seems probably true.
so prediction is an anxious process. One sec.
Shall pause. All right. Well, in that case,
But do
Well,
take
you-
it out. Do
yeah,
take,
yeah,
do
yeah.
take it out.
of course,
It's not
for
necessary.
normal things. Anybody currently watching, which is probably 0-ish. Where are we at? Oh, we have a 1, which is myself.
If anybody's watching, I doubt they'd be surprised. That's pretty much that's a pretty good slip.
Never forget, you're in front of camera.
Mm-hmm.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. Mm-mm-mm-mm. Are we ready? Yeah.
All right,
So I think we were just into something interesting. The predictive element of regret and anxiety, driving, which is neurosis. This is neurotic.
predictive
it's
element
gotta
of
be-
no.
Ain't it?
That's not right. Regret and anxiety produces prediction. So, summarizing the dream so far.
Okay, yeah.
Summarizing the dream so far to dictate what will happen in the dream after the fact. That's prediction. To take,
And was anxiety and
to be-
regret?
it's to take regrets and to reformulate them as the anxiety. Right? Like they're not separate things. Regret is
Pardon?
past regrets are the fuel of future anxiety, right? You're anxious about the things that did not succeed in your past, because
Right.
your future is formulated by recombining past events.
Yeah. Now, just being a temporal phenomenon, like based on through time, I'm kind of seeing like a dichotomy between neurosis and psychosis. Psychosis being like a higher order level
Overarching.
view of reality of what exists, what is the possible. But then within that, there are narratives which involve self and all kinds of stuff like that. And
That's
where neurosis is being calculated.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in looking to the past in regret, that's purely like pulling past narratives into the current moment in order that the narrative continues instead of in the moment being dictated by what's around you, or like just being present in the moment.
the experience
You're
of that
pulling
moment,
the past and
to color it.
and covering over the moment, so that what comes out of the moment is the past, basically projected to the future.
Retrofitted.
So
I would call that retrofitting.
That to me seems a pretty neat distinction between the two.
And the two
psychosis, neurosis.
Okay.
That's a neat distinction, because neurosis is a time-based happening experience through like narrative, whereas a psychosis is more like a perfective existence of
The overarching
things.
the overarching story, and then the latching on to making the next situation retrofitted into that story. So you can't take the moment for the moment.
Yeah, they can't be
as
separated,
is
of
the
course.
the building block
Yeah.
of whatever narrative, but having to already been shaped by an existent narrative and retrofitted back into a specific mold, if you will, rather than it being the raw experience of it at the exact moment that it happened.
Yep, it gets clouded
That's the gist of it. Yeah.
over. Okay, so and I like these mechanics in the context of our, like, say, a few episodes ago about ontology and mythology. and we were just trying to get into like, well, what does it mean to have a mythology? Like, what is it? What are the mechanics of what's going on? And now I feel like we've kind of laid it out
Well,
here pretty well.
For one, you don't. There's no experience that is not overlaid by mythology, i.e., the story that will give the experience a description, a meaning,
unless you're
in a context.
a baby.
Right, which has no reference to anything except the bodily references.
But eventually it will
So
formulate this.
in that case, it's not like there is no language to form it. What there isn't is a language that makes it a concrete narrative. Like, starts here, this is the middle, this is the end. That's how it works. Starts, middles, and ends are experiential, but they're not redescribed by another story out on top of the fact. So the body still presents beginnings, middles, and ends, but a story is not formulated to capture the beginning, the middle, and the end, and therefore that gets lost in the mix of experiences, if you will.
Sure.
Because the other aspect is like the overarching aspect of experience is that you started experiencing at birth, and you're in the middle
But
of it,
also,
and the end means no more experience. So it's kind of like there's the bootstrapping as element to this, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
With the body
seems
providing
a bit
the initial.
confusing because the child, like the baby,
So
has nothing,
your
no
nervous-
reference for almost anything to make a story about anything at all.
so
How
your-
does a baby make a story?
Hold on. Your body will say things like, pain started, react. You react, pain going, you react. You react, pain subsided, you react. You react. That's the end of the story. The difference between this and capturing it by language is that after the fact, you can reiterate
Yeah.
the
Because
symbolic
you
representation
have
of the story.
more information
That is
about
what's
the
lacking.
environment as to what caused the pain in the first place, why it's happening,
So-
who is involved.
So that's the difference between, like, you might have experienced it and
Yeah.
internalized it, and
No, I get-
there is no more symbolic representation outside of like feeding it into the next experience.
It's interesting because there must be some bootstrapping going on. Like this process that we do as adults must be in its infancy, if you will, still happening.
No pun intended.
Pun intended.
well, that's like literally what I'm saying.
It's still there. It must still be there. There must be something still there happening to make sense. Because if nothing made sense even as a baby, then nothing ever would make sense.
Well, how would you respond to hunger with suckling, for example, if there was nothing in there, right? Like it's a built-in.
Well, sure.
It's built into the body, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like there's already a natural language that exists. It's just not getting into the abstractive things that we also add on top of this as a species of our own making, if you will. Like, you can see elements of this process in other animals, for example. Right? It's just not as grand. Like, even chimps have rituals. Shit that they will do that has zero reason, zero benefit, as far as an activity goes, but they will fucking do it. And it often has to do with interesting natural phenomena. So one of the things that I'm remembering as I'm saying this is a troop of chimps stumbled upon a weird, I guess, dying or dead log that had an interesting, like, resonance quality if you throw shit at it. So they religiously would pick up a rock, throw it at it, just to make that sound. No logical reason, no
That's cool.
explanation. This is just like, tree makes sound. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Just like a natural, whether that builds into anything or not, that's a question for the more experienced people. But
Well, it's like exploration. It's like something new, something you haven't experienced. A novelty. Novelty is a driver.
to have like a ritualistic thing where like part of the troop comes up, throws their rocks, moves away. Some time passes, a troop comes up, throws their rocks, moves away, and all do it the same way over and over and over again. Right? Like here you have an emergent behavior based on an element of the environment that was provided to it by chance, if you will, that drives its further causative evolution, if you want to take it that far. I am an accelerationist, as I said, and those are the extrapolations that I'm making.
Wait. Move farther. For what I didn't hear what I didn't get what you just said before you made that statement.
That behaviors can appear within a social structure that are completely alien to its original formation. So the presence of this hollowed out tree has nothing to do with how chimps evolved. Like literally zero
Sure.
common ground. If you
Okay.
all of a sudden a chimp discovers that it makes a sound, and whatever mental processes are happening within all of their collective brains are taking it to mean as something. It affects them
It's novel.
in their social
It's
language.
a novel sound.
In their social language. So the appearance of the tree coming from the bottom up, with having nothing to do with trying to make the sound for them, and them not trying to create such trees to begin with.
Yeah.
It's just an incidental overlap that just happens to intersect in the same environment. So their environment, this environment,
Yeah.
no logical intersection except for the fact that they are in the same space. All of a sudden, a ritual develops. Another phenomena, altogether new. A social structure phenomena.
Yes.
Only made available by the presence of something that has nothing to do with their social structure to begin with in the first place.
Okay. How accelerationism?
So here you're growing up in your stack, your own bubble. Another stack appears in its own bubble. But the fact that you can communicate with each other means that your bubble has more access to a different environment. This bubble has access to a different environment. The two symbiotically can become together. So more hollow trees, for example, by people like humans.
Not only trees, hollow trees, but so many things in the history of that species and our species have been interesting. And I think we've adapted to seek out the interesting and the novel to understand our environments better.
So step this back a few.
So it's not weird.
A few,
but where's the accelerationism? Sorry.
The accelerationism is like, you take that example, you take Homo sapiens, and you step back a few million years and try to replay the same scenario again. So now you have a more cognitively ready species recycling the same idea.
Yeah, I would do that. Why do you have to go back 100 million years? Or millions of years? I would do that right now if a tree sounded cool.
In more abstract-minded species like ourselves, that mini ritual can become much more significant. It can become a part of what you do in your daily life. It can become a part of what is existent in your nature. Like that tree making a sound could be a special offering from a specific deity.
Yeah. Okay.
Examples of it arising in any different place
I
is
think
examples of that deity being there.
I think you're pointing to neurosis, the tunneling trap, the trap of getting.
Well, this is more of a
cycled into
natural
something.
neurosis, one
Sure.
that doesn't dictate you have to stick to that train of thought.
But I'll say this.
But much like
often when we
teeth
talk
and
about
claws.
the word accelerationism, we have I read Mark Fisher, and I
Accelerationism?
believe there's a true accelerationism which isn't just about destroy everything so that somehow it's going to be better, but it's about come back to the fundamentals. Where did we come from? Why are we here?
Yeah.
That's the true accelerationism. What is our history? What are we?
True
what are we-
accelerationism.
What are we
I
doing
love
here?
that.
We gotta throw quotes.
The
on
true,
it.
the one and only.
Capital T.
No, I think what you're talking about is the difference between.
I just heard
Just-
you say it and it triggered me. That's all.
When I say accelerationism, is I'm taking the premise of the starting point and just watching what it runs through. So in this case, it was the chimps throwing rocks at a hollowed out tree, recognizing it as something different in the environment for themselves that has nothing to do with anything prior to that discovery.
Isn't that
Like,
just
it's not in the-
neurosis, though? Did we have to bring in acceleration? Isn't it just neurosis?
The accelerationism aspect is you take that situation, you place a species like Homo sapiens in front of it instead of chimps,
Okay.
and see what happens.
So the angle on acceleration here is to understand that using this narrative as a tool to understand that this is what happens to people,
Mhm.
and that could be part of digging back to our roots and who we are, what kind of things we do, and projecting that out to the future.
Yeah, so the difference with the Homo sapien that I'm trying to get at, for example, that's different from the chimp, is that the Homo sapien will essentially reconstruct the narrative of that tree in a far more sophisticated way that actually presents itself a story, like a full-blown mythology.
Yeah.
The
So
idea of the chimp.
So you're pointing to what I called neurotic, just now as a neurotic activity, being elevated to a psychotic activity. It's becoming part of the reality in a sense, a ritual.
And
all
again,
this
in
kind of-
this case, this is not to be taken negatively.
like the tree
because-
itself kind of rises.
So at this point in this
This special
juncture-
tree becomes a thing
Yes.
aside from all other trees. It's a
but-
special tree. That's it becomes psychotic.
But this juncture is not the kind of psychopathy I'm talking about when it comes to the system. It's when you're incapable of making a different decision of what that tree might mean.
Right.
That's where the
Whereas
psychosis.
an animal in the moment
So-
typically would be like, what the fuck? I don't care.
So imagine a picture of several humans making their own deductions about the meaning of this tree and how to fit it into this into the narrative that they have of their mythology. Psychosis is when like you can't accept an alternate version. So you're so deep into whatever mythology you're in that to classify this as maybe this, maybe that, but not exactly this, becomes a no-go. Like you are literally shunned for it.
Yeah, and you can't imagine really like chimps or whatever
Going that far.
Having this kind of cult-like understanding of what this special tree is. Like where
Right,
they'll just kill each other
like-
over like if you disrespect it or something.
Like if you get the mythology wrong, you're the enemy. They
If
don't,
you-
have,
if
they
you
don't
throw a-
have that element.
If you throw a pine cone and like it doesn't make the same noise, like they'll kill you. You're dead now. Like, probably that wouldn't happen with chimps. So that's how
No,
I feel.
it could, but but what it wouldn't be is like you fucked up our story by this pine cone. It has to be rocks. Like they might get pissed off of it being different at the very moment, but are they gonna keep the story?
Right.
Are they gonna be like chimp X
Blasphemy.
through pine cone? Therefore, we hate anybody who picks up pine cones.
Mm.
Like they don't. That's the part that doesn't keep happening. in that scenario. Where I'm saying in Homo sapiens situation would. Maybe not as strongly at first, but
we have better
eventually as the story
abstraction
develops.
abilities, also memory.
Exactly. And we write shit down.
Who threw that pine cone?
Pine cone throwers start to be executed on the spot.
Yeah. The law.
I am the law.
Right. Okay. So we're almost kind of done here for the day. I'm just wondering, have we done a justice to the arc of we did for a couple episodes ontology, then we moved up to mythology, then we figured out, well, we can't really talk about mythology without the mechanics of like the operating system of what's going on. So then we dove into psychosis and neurosis, and I'm thinking, how does that relate to myth, or like have we wrapped that up?
So the diagram
Properly.
I mentioned early on with this ontological matrix in the very center.
Right.
That's what's gonna tie that all together.
One of these. Let's find it first. Because I'm pretty sure I did find it.
That's it.
Yo. Oops. Bobius. That and this one, which many may be familiar with.
Yeah, and we're mostly interested at the top.
This is
part.
called the ontological matrix. This is a representation of how people understand society around them and all the parts and players, and how they come together to work together or drive a car or fix a car.
Via myth.
And this is our typical obfuscated end of that.
Yeah. So, to bring a few of the highlights together, we have your obfuscated narrative, subdivided into its sound bites. Sound bites are components of the market machine mythology.
And these are like narrative, like myth bites, if you will.
Here we have ego. We've made references to the self.
Today, even. Yep. Self potentially being a more natural element, or ego being tied into the system.
So, self is self-reference expressed within narrative as self.
Right. So
And then
in other words,
ego-
it's supposed to be neutral. The idea of self as a neutral thing, like
Yeah.
if I want to walk over there, my brain has to calculate that I have appendages to do something. So this is the story I'm simulating in my head.
or rather-
therefore I can walk.
There is some kind of an I to which appendages are all assigned.
Right.
Because you can break this story down a little bit
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
You can break it down as like there are appendages that need to move around
Yeah.
in unison,
And
which is selfless.
Often we don't need to think that high level. Like it's I who is altogether appendaging.
Yeah,
Right. It's just like
it's the
But
autopilot.
Still, and yeah. So there's a distinction between the self-reference, which like lets you do that kind of stuff, and like this idea of a self, which is I am this whole
Thing with appendages.
and I have a schedule and I'll be there at 2:00 or whatever. This kind
Right,
of stuff.
right. And then ego on top of that is the self in the narrative being traded through the market. So it's self
Social.
plus like a value an enumeration, a value numeral that is attached to it. It's more worthy, less worthy, more worthy,
Yeah.
less worthy. Depending on which part of the system we're trying to retrofit it back
Been
into.
a little while but is there a healthy self? Because
Self is a phenomena. Ego is the unhealthy articulation of that phenomenon.
right, it's almost the same thing. It's like how we describe how things can go wrong through being reified. So a reified self in the market context is like, well, I have to go to work. I am working.
It's the sell yourself situation. It's basically
Right. It's
what
still
makes
basically the same thing. Ego, self.
what makes every single person a whore, regardless of how they want to call other people. Like, this is why
The
we're
ego.
whoring ourselves out to the system. It's because we're selling our body this way, that way, the other way, whether it be poked and prodded with bullets, whether it be poked and prodded with genitalia, or whether it be poked and prodded with insecurities and fucking
Shame.
yeah, you whatever you
Guilt.
can write on paper,
Mhm.
essentially, whatever concept you can pick up.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
So ego only gets involved when self is retrofitted back
Sort of
into the
hijacked. Yeah.
quantified
So
system.
we hardly distinguish, like, functionally ego and self are sort of the same thing, but the ego is hijacked. Definitely, that's how we classify it. It's
Reified with the
by the machine.
reified by the charlatan.
Right. And again, it's a building, so you need a self-reference in order to create this self object in your narrative, which isn't necessarily bad, but when that self object becomes hijacked and reified over and over again into an identity, hooked into the market where you have rewards and punishments, right? That this is the ego side.
Yeah, when you bind the self to a
Bound.
reward, to a
Right.
punishment,
Self
that is what
bound.
the ego
Right.
is material. What you can call the ego at that point.
Mhm.
Point on your point. Self-reference is inescapable in general because the proximity complex is at play regardless. So by that I mean, like, the meaningful elements of any narrative, all myth that are coming through, are going to have a distinction made between, is this me, is this not me, is this a part of me, is this not a part of me, am I a part of this,
Proximity
am I not a part
complex.
of this.
I forgot how did you start that sentence just now? What are you talking about?
That self-reference is inescapable in terms of the full-blown narratological composition that
Right.
follows. And-
Even in natural senses.
Right.
Like, we're just moving through the world, deciding whether something is part of us or not.
So, the options that were given by
My clothes are me.
yeah, or
That sort of thing.
the clothes are mine. Another interesting. Like, my clothes are part of me.
Right.
That's my clothes are mine. So self-reference appears whether or not there's self in narrative or there's not self in narrative, and conceit is the main characteristic of the follow-up. Conceit causes, like, the distinction between pain, pleasure, neutrality of any given moment. Not conceit. Those are just the qualities of the moment. Conceit places that self-reference. This is me. This is not me. This is part of me. This is not part of me. This is part of. I am part of this. This I am not part of that. It places that calculation as to, am I the same, better, or worse than whatever the presented moment is given us.
Mm-hmm. And this
So-
is what drives the ego to move if it's satisfied by because it's happy or whatever.
No. This is what gives the capacity for self-reference to become self in some narrative.
I thought
So-
that's possible without conceit. Conceit adding like
no.
let's just define conceit quickly. Conceit being
is the calculation of I am better, same, worse.
right, and this
Nothing else.
this leads to conclusions like I hate this, I like this.
Check this out. Pain is experienced as a phenomenon. Self-reference is on the flippity side of I am this, I'm not this. This is part of me, this is not part of me. I am part
Sure.
of this, I am not part
Proximity complex.
of that. Conceit comes into play. Pain, I am better, worse. I am better for this pain, this is a reward. I am worse for this pain, this is a punishment. I am not affected by this pain, I don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
Now a narrative formulates itself.
Yeah. So
out
this is
with,
the hijacking.
with a full-blown
Because everybody feels things, good or bad. But if the narrative can get in there and inject its own story of this pain is actually good or this pleasure is actually bad, you can shape the entire
pleasure,
reality.
bad, guilt.
Right.
Right? Regret, anxiety.
Pain, good.
Pain, good. Anxiety for performing for the future. Do I need to endure more pain? Rough examples.
Sure, yeah.
In this case.
Okay.
But that's the general idea. So the point is that you have a self-reference. Self is something that is a fundamental element of self-reference that keeps appearing in narrative, and conceit is the thing that solidifies said self into a framework of regret or anxiety, causing the neurosis. So conceit, neurosis are intertwined by one being the functional driver of the other. On the altruistic side, self-reference is retained as self-reference. There is no self in the same sense as the Buddhist parlance.
Right.
You have this was pain. You have this was pleasure. You have
Right.
these are the
This was
qualities
neither,
of the
or whatever.
moment.
Yeah.
If I were to place a self in there was a self with pleasure, there was a self with pain, there was a self with this. The narrative does not need to escape
And that's all
into
fine.
egoism.
Yeah. Right. So this feels like or sounds like the stepping back idea again, where whatever's happening, step back and process, but not to simply react according to programming. It's a very common,
Roughly speaking, but this is why.
very common trope. I feel like a lot of people understand that.
And so, to not make it more of a trope, these are the fundamental underpinnings.
This is to reduce neurosis.
And now we can get back into myth, the market machine, and the matrix. Those are being our original layers, right? So we have our ontology,
Mm-hmm.
we have our mythology,
Now
and this is a diagram that displays the neurosis element and the psychosis element, at least from this side of it.
Interesting. And to me, this is a diagram that shows society working together, different agents, all in one, this matrix coming together with basically society, reality,
But-
if you will, shared reality.
But
Right. The obfuscated meta narrative.
that's the problem with that coming together. It's not the coming together. which would have happened regardless.
Yeah.
It's the obfuscation of this recombination. Which
And it's that no matter how much you study all the parts, they will never make a coherent sense altogether.
yeah.
There won't be one like grand narrative possible to it.
Not one that isn't either contradictory or is incomplete. Where have you heard those phrases before?
And that's due, yes, uncertainty principle, due to the nature
No.
of Godel.
Incompleteness theory.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Incompleteness. Yeah. Anyways, the fact of the sound,
Principle is something else.
the fact of what a soundbite is. This is what I just wanted to say. Sound bites are typically taken as truth or reality. They're not digested.
Well, that's why we are not using the words like sentences or anything else. That's why it's called a sound bite.
Right.
A complete narrative.
It's kind of like a programmatic chunk.
Yeah.
Right. And the chunks don't come together. Very nice. And we shall be right back. What were we talking about again?
Things.
There was
We're talking about things.
uncertainty principle, or no? I said that, and then
Yeah, the uncertainty is more to do.
no, I know, but what was
with
what was
chaos versus
the
order?
what was the answer again? To your question, pardon. Um,
Incompleteness.
Incompleteness.
Incompleteness or
It feels very related to me.
If not incompleteness, you arrive at contradiction.
This is the Godel stuff about stacking layers.
Yeah, you
emergence.
have one of two options with the formal system. Either it will
Right.
be incomplete in the sense that it will have, this is what we're getting at, it will have statements that appear within its confines, that are legal within its confines, but are not predicted by its own set out axioms.
In other words, what built up to that moment, you can't just calculate it and have
Right.
that moment binary like equals success, whatever.
And the converse is that if you don't have a system sophisticated enough to do that, it's not going to be able to actually capture anything, the full spectrum of what it's trying to cover.
Right.
So it's either going to
Yeah.
have like incomplete statements, or it's going to have
Yes.
complete statements, but ones that lead to contradictions.
This describes the kind of the manifold between layers, that certain things from below can build up logically and rationally into the axioms, maybe that
Yeah, but
that are creating a new layer above. But then what's created within that layer language out of the axioms can't be arrived at from that calculation that you.
It's
you
not even
built
that.
up.
You will have full-blown statements made in the upper layer of
Yeah.
that system that cannot be broken down
That's what I
into
just
any
said.
axioms. Oh, well, it sounded different, but
That's what I meant.
I'm trying to be anal.
Anyways.
I am being pedantic on that one.
Right.
Because I don't really want to be misunderstood on how far we're taking the whole
It's-
theorem and how we are not actually, because
It's a problem.
so
It's a challenge, I guess.
so in a
to-
lot of
to model. It's a modeling
so,
challenge.
so in a lot of spiritualisms circles, the Gödel theorem has been picked up as another one of those golden calves, if you will, for the be end and end all of all explanations, much like quantum physics was
But it's not-
picked up for its connotation towards multiplicity
It's kind of like an
of
explanation that you can't
universality.
explain.
Yeah, and all I'm trying to
So
do
what
is make
even
it
is
clear that we're only carrying this theorem as far as it needs to go without trying to make it
Minimally,
sound like
sure.
it's trying to solve other problems, which it's not. The only real utility of the theorem is to delineate between layers
It's
in the complex
yeah,
in the
exactly.
complexity
That's
of
a
the system.
utility. It's a constraint. The language. If you understood how molecules themselves, no matter what their nuclear mass is, how they behaved within one another, you can understand that to the exact, like to God's understanding of that.
But I want to explain.
But once you
chemistry.
create a molecule, so this is atoms. So atoms of whatever size, you can have that explained 100%. Once you go to a molecule, those explanations can no longer project into what's going to happen up here.
Right, it's going to be the combination of how those pieces are put together that are going to dictate how the overarching qualities of the full object interact, which brings us to the concept of chemistry instead of quantum mechanics, and why we need a leap of
And so
physics.
this all of this, again, we're coming back to the stacking and the model. This is all the Portal Mountain mythology, right? This is our mythology we're developing, which
Right,
we're honestly
the sound bites which we quote unquote believe.
ripping it off of so many different places for different aspects of it, but yeah, that's it's a vision of the world, of reality, how to make sense of it.
It's interesting that you're saying that
Layers
because
of complexity.
because getting stuck to reality is actually a fundamental problem. a neurosis problem, psychosis problem. So I guess the trick is to try to describe what we just said from the perspective of how this is a myth and how it has the proper isomorphism parallels to the body's expression, while at the same time preserving the idea of capturing it with words.
Mm-hmm. I like how you said the body's expression. That's like the history of life, of what it is now. We only can see a snapshot of right now, what the state is. But clearly, like, cells never had such a great understanding of tissues. They don't need to.
Do they still?
I don't think.
Do they have any understanding of tissue?
But that's
at
the
this
thing.
point
It's
in time, like it's not. It's,
like
not,
you
it's
have
not even a skill they learn.
You have platforms. Like, for example,
tissue is just what happens if you have enough cells running together in a certain way.
we're often having technological metaphors. So it's like the internet, but yet you can have many applications just sitting on that. The internet doesn't care what's inside the packet. But yet you can have a web browser going over, you could have a video game going over, you could have a file transfer.
You can have a human, you can have a dog, you can have a cat.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah.
molecules support all of those arrangements, is I guess what you're saying.
And yet there is this isomorphism at the network layer that it somehow
Just so many isomorphisms.
is it's not just like it was designed. I don't know.
So
how to say it. That the internet protocol has been designed in a way that it's meant to capture the potentiality of that layer itself, so that it becomes a platform for many things. It's just performing a function, right? It's been designed in a way that's generic, right?
Relegated to being a layer.
And it's kind of, you don't want to say like a cell has been designed this way, but however you decide that as cells have come together to be what they are, they're generic enough to create a vast different type of tissues. Those tissues are generic enough to create a vast number of organs.
Interesting point
And this
about
is
cells.
isomorphism.
Hold on. Interesting point about cells is that not only are they required to survive the preconditions of the bottom world, so the physical condition,
Without a body.
the chemical composition of the environment or
Yeah.
whatever, they're also required to coexist in the body in a certain specific set of rules. So there's two sides to this. There's the chemistry and whatever that allows the cell to exist from coming up from the bottom, just like the basic physics rules for cellular existence to begin with. And then on top of that, your body does not need this cell here, it needs it there. Your body does not need this cell here, it needs it over here.
Sure.
On and on and on it goes. So
Yep.
there's another top-down sort of push towards this has to be in this place, that has to be in that place, this
Right.
has to be patterned this way, and it's all the
And
same molecules.
This is the top-down causality, which is weird.
Yeah, weird in the sense to describe, because it has no
And
logical correlation
and
from
the history of it is sort of like a trillion things were tried until somehow this thing satisfied upper layers, and then this upper layer merged, and then that replicated with the upper layer. Now these cells are like being carried along with this upper layer through time. That's the history of our world,
and that's not even getting into conversions.
according to Portal Mountain. Our origin story.
Yeah. If we were to get into conversions, we would also be able to say, like, up on these layers, only certain number of combinations are actually feasible. Only these shapes are
exactly
possible.
feasible. Why? But well, you can see why because this
And so-
this is what worked.
And so, what does nature show us is that we have repetitive body plans coming across different species entirely
Hmm.
that fulfill the same niches. So,
Right.
the bat, the bird,
So,
the pterodactyl,
in other words,
the fish,
we can observe in our
The
history,
dolphin and
archaeologically, and all that, completely different. Let's say like causal evolutions, like of
from,
things
from
going,
bottom up.
building up in complexity, in almost different silos, like completely different environments where things are moving in to take certain meta shapes
Niches.
that are it's like just waiting to happen. It's like almost as if it was always there, but
So,
then
like-
it's like okay, that works.
So,
Now it's working.
historical examples. The pterodactyl,
Crabs.
yes. But let's go further back. The pterodactyl,
Why not?
the bird, the bat.
To fly.
So each one developed a different skeletal structure to support the same overarching architecture.
Mm-hmm.
So
The
with
ability to sail through the air.
yeah, so with a pterodactyl, it was a particular set of bones that merged into a wing shape that gave it a flap on top. With the birds, it was a specific shape that did the same thing. This is the one I'm trying to demonstrate actually because I don't know the difference. But in general, it's kind of like whatever this shape is.
Sure.
And then you have your bats that are basically retracted their entire forearm to create this flapping structure.
Sure. Okay.
In all cases, the overarching architecture is that of the wing.
Yep.
The formation of the wing itself
How it
goes along different trajectories of trying to figure out that exact same shape, or similar enough for it to work itself out. So now you
Yeah.
have flying mammals, flying reptiles, and flying well, reptiles, if you were to go
I
back.
guess. Don't you have flying fish too? They do fly. Fish, there are fish that jump out of the water and they kind of spread something and they end up going farther than they would otherwise.
There's those.
That's another convergence.
Then there's another one with the stingrays. If you watch a stingray actually swim, it looks like it's flying through water.
Sure.
Like it has the exact same motions that bird wings would have, slower.
Interesting. One of the main things seems to be lift, though. I don't know how much stingrays are interested in lift.
Lift and bone density. Bone density is really the predictor of if something is fine or not. If it's lighter, it's going to have enough force to supply with its muscles.
If it has that sort of thing. Anyways, where were we? Where are we in the whole scheme of things here? Because we have to wrap it up. Definitely, we're piecing out in about, let's say, 5 minutes.
So the connection between
less.
neurosis and morality.
Morality, I keep thinking of like what's right and wrong.
That's
what most people.
that's morality. So that's a quantified Boolean. Yes, right. No, wrong.
Wrong,
yes,
right?
Right.
Yep.
No,
And that
wrong.
makes sense because it's not arguing what's real or what's not.
It's
It's just
categorizing.
within that, if this happens, then do that. If this happens, then do that. Assuming the reality.
The other aspect of morality is the quality of the moment. So every moment has a moral quality associated with it. In that sense,
Okay.
it's talking about, in this context, what is the correct course of action? What is the incorrect course of action? So it's more of a technical situation, and it has to do with taking the dream through the model itself, aka not using the dream as the full source of information, but taking the dream through the process of model, breaking it down as to what is the model saying about said dream, and identifying the moral qualities of that.
Are you talking about isomorphically? So I thought it just sounded like you were talking about, like, let's say the negative, the problem, if you will. But now you're saying introducing the model. Are you talking about already a remedial thing to fix?
So, what? Not fix.
To address?
An
approach?
To distinguish. So in the model, your dream, which is the general dictator of morality, which uses conceit to grade more moral, less moral, same moral, am I morally the same, am I morally wrong, am I morally correct, that narrative.
Mm-hmm. On top of affect, like, no matter what affect is, good, bad, whatever, neutral, this morality on top of that is saying, no, it's good, it's bad, it's...
Yeah, displaying your experience is actually a reward. This pleasure you experience is actually a punishment.
Right.
Based on this narrative.
You should feel guilty for that, or whatever, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Whereas this asks you to consider the implication of the moral qualities and the realistic qualities, despite the fact of whether it's extrinsically described as moral or real.
Mm-hmm. Right. The ability to step back. That's how I like to describe it.
What it isn't asking you to do is define your own morals.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I don't know if we'll have a part 2 for this, but I think we went in very deep into it.
It's not about trying to prescribe your own morals as much as it is about to figure out their articulation from the context in which the moment appears. So it's going to be the context, the memeplex, main meme, memeplex, context.
Context is moment related.
Right, the memeplex arrives
Yeah.
at each moment as a distinct thing.
You're talking about not presence. Yeah, presence. The immersion, presence, being present, the ability to make your own understanding of what's happening aside from
The dream that feeds you
the inertia of morality.
Right. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the world of myth, I guess. Is that
So, the point is, like, it isn't that, like, the dream drives the question of what's moral or what's real. It's more like the moment is the expressor of real and moral, and the dream is an expression of what those moments synthesize, if you will. But
like
they're not more real. They're not more moral. It doesn't give the dream any of those qualities which psychosis will insist on.
Shall we end on head scratching? And you have to put a curious look on your face. Maybe scratch the chin. All right, and with that, we must depart. Unfortunately, that's it for today. We may we may do a part 2 on this. I feel like we've covered it even more than the last one that we covered, psychosis. So,
Well, we weren't interrupted either.
yeah, we're fairly on point today. No interruptions. Yep, that helps. That does help. Although, fist bump to Dustin. And all our peeps who show up every now and then, and also those in chat, Portal Mountain, etc. Love you all, and we'll see you next